Welcome to this meeting of Perth and Kinross Council. Special welcome to those watching the meeting online or in person. There will be a lunch break, hopefully sometime between 12 and half 12 is my optimistic target, but we shall see how business is progressing at that point. A few notes of congratulations before we start. So I'd like to welcome Zoe Robertson as our new Chief Officer Director of Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership. A big congratulations to Zoe. Many of us have worked with her for a number of years, and I'm sure we'll look forward to working with her in her new role. Also, congratulations to Otterarder Community Sport and Recreation, who have won the Best Community Sport and Recreation Charity 2026. So big congratulations to them as well. And also congratulations to Glenfarr Community Transport on being named Community Transport Organisation of the Year. And I'd like to offer the opportunity to come in for local ward members, all of whom I see wish to comment. So starting with Councillor Waters.
Provost, thank you. Provost members, as a frequent user of the Glenfarr buses, I would like to add my congratulations to Glenfarr Community Transport on being named UK Community Transport Organisation of the Year in the category for organisations operating 6 or more vehicles. This is a significant national award and one that is well deserved. This is an exceptional example of a local community-led service delivering real impact. Community transport is absolutely vital in rural areas such as Kinrossshire and Glenfarr, supporting connectivity, reducing isolation, and enabling people to access work, healthcare, and everyday services. What stands out about Glenfarr Community Transport is the breadth of this impact. This is not just about transport. It is about strengthening communities, supporting well-being, and ensuring that people are not left behind, unless they're late for the bus, of course. Services like this depend on people, the volunteers, drivers, trustees, and staff who work tirelessly behind the scenes to keep services running day in and day out. This award reflects not just the organisational success, but the dedication, time, and care that individuals bring to this work. It also demonstrates what can be achieved through strong partnership working and a clear understanding of local need. Glenfarr Community Transport is not only delivering an excellent service, it is leading the way. I am sure colleagues will join me in congratulating everyone involved and in placing on record our thanks for the vital service they provide to communities across the area. Provost, given the scale of this achievement, I'd like to ask whether you would consider hosting a civic reception here in Perth. So that we can properly recognise the volunteers, drivers, and all those involved in building this award-winning organisation. Because this is more than just an award, it is a celebration of community effort at its very best. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Councillor Cuthbert next.
Thank you, Provost. Glenfarr Community Transport Group represents a change of culture. It's a fantastic model. It's massively increased the numbers of people using the service, more than doubled them. They are on time, they're friendly, and it's just made a huge difference locally. I want to thank Margaret Roy and her team for the work that they've put in and supporting Glenfarr Community Transport. And I want to say that I'd like to see it expanded further, possibly taking over all the routes in Kinrossshire. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbert. Councillor Robertson next.
Thank you, Provost. I agree. I agree with the comments my ward councillor colleagues have made. If I might say, I can give a little background to this whole situation. A resident of Kinross, who I know quite well, moved to Glenfarg, and he emailed me and said, "Willie, Glenfarg's terrible. There's no transport. There's only about 2 buses a day." And I said, "Yeah, it's always been very difficult for Glenfarg residents to get in and out." So the person involved, Drew Smart, said he got to work on it, and they actually set up the Glenfarg Rural Transport Network. Him and a team of supporters, and it's just amazing how it was a grassroots thing that's grown and has been so successful. And I think it'd be really nice if we as a council recognise their efforts. And it is a model I would like to see used in other parts of rural Perth and Kinross, because it has made a huge difference to the lives of many people throughout Kinrossshire. It covers all the way out to Blair and Gone, and gives important links to Perth, to Stirling, to the Kinross Park and Ride, and allows people who were previously isolated to get out and about. And the bus is really funny because it's like a little meeting room every time you go in it, and it's just wonderful. And the drivers and volunteers are actually excellent. So I would back everything that people have said and join and send my congratulations to them as well. Thank you.
Councillor Freshwater next.
Thank you, Provost. Can I just second the comments that my fellow ward councillors have made? And it's obviously fantastic to see this award, but also no surprise when you see how fantastic that Glenfarg Community Transport is. I remember the very first meeting I went to, I never thought I would learn so much about bus economics. It sounds completely nerdy, but you do suddenly realise why bus services work and why they don't. And it was very fortuitous in the sense that there were people in the community who had these expertise, and it was a really sort of wonderful alignment of the stars. So I would second everything which my fellow ward councillors have said. I just want to add one final point, which was some of the investments that they've made. So as well as obviously taking over some of the existing services and improving them massively that you've heard about, they did also invest in a pilot of a direct responsive transport system, which allowed, for example, residents of Cleach, myself included, to travel from Cleach to Cambridge and back entirely by public transport. And again, as Councillor Robertson said, I think these are models of transportation that we need to sort of look at how to do things. But it really is just utterly fantastic, and I would suggest that every local authority in the UK be looking to Glenfarg as an exemplar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lane next.
Yeah, thanks, and echo everything everybody said, but I think the council itself should take some credit in this. We've been very supportive of the community and invested and worked with them to bring forward school contracts, etc. So I think it is a great model, but everybody in here should be happy with the success and the award they've got, but we should recognise that the Perth and Kinross Council has been supportive of the whole venture.
Thank you. Councillor Watt.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to add to your congratulations to ACSR and Auchterarder, an organisation which has increased sports participation and improved facilities all across Auchterarder. Seed planted, special mention to Denise Jackson, who cajoled the community into forming the charity, and it's grown exponentially from there with green space, bike hubs, pump tracks, play parks, and a huge increase in participation in all sports at the school facilities. So I'd just like to pay special thanks to them for all their hard work, all the many volunteers that are involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Provost. I'd just like to echo the views of my fellow ward councillor with regards to ACSR and the fantastic work that they are doing in Auchterarder, and what they have delivered in the past few years has been quite phenomenal. And I'd also like to give a special mention to Tim Hart from ACSR for all the excellent work that he's put into it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to respond to Councillor Waters' request, I'm happy to agree that we will hold a civic reception for Glenfarg Community Transport, and the Civic Office will communicate with ward members to make arrangements for that to happen.
Provost, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it, and I'm sure Glenfarg Community Transport, all their volunteers and workers and everything. I appreciate that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. We shall now confirm any apologies and take a roll call of those joining online.
Thank you, Provost. We have apologies today from Councillor Allen. We have a number of members who are joining online. If they can confirm when I call out their name that they are present. Councillor James.
Morning, I'm here, thanks.
Councillor Kogali. I'll come back to Councillor Kogali. Councillor Mayer.
Hi, sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh. Sorry, I think that was Councillor Kogali and Councillor Mayer, I think.
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. And Councillor Welch.
Yes, I can confirm I'm here.
And Bailey Williamson.
Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. All other members are in the chambers, Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Duff, you wish to come in?
Yeah, just in relation to Councillor Allen, he is actually trying to access the meeting but having difficulty technically at the moment, so he may join us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and we will record his apologies if not. Moving on to item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest in respective items on today's business? Councillor Willie Robertson.
Could I declare an interest in paper 7 and I'll withdraw when that's been discussed?
Thank you very much, Councillor Robertson. Any other declarations of interest? I see no other declarations of interest, therefore we'll move on to item A1, which is a request for deputation. We have received a request for a deputation from Mr. David Adamson in relation to item 8 on the agenda. Are members happy to agree to hear the deputation? Good, thank you. Members, item 3 is the minutes of the meeting of Perth and Kinross Council, the 29th of April 2026. Are members happy to approve the minute? Thank you. Members, item 4 is the outstanding business statement. Are there any questions on the outstanding business statement? If there are no questions on the outstanding business statement, are we happy to note the outstanding business statement and remove any completed actions? Thank you. Members, item 5 is reviewing options for the future of library services, and I'm going to invite Steve MacDonald, Economic Development Manager, Tourism, Culture and Place, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning, members. The report before Council sets out the options for the future delivery of library services across Perth and Kinross in the context of significant financial pressures and the scheduled cessation of additional non-recurring funding provided to CPK in 2025-26 and 2026-27. Libraries are a statutory function and a vital component of the Council's approach to tackling poverty, supporting learning and skills, improving health and well-being and strengthening communities. They deliver wide-ranging social, cultural and economic benefits, including supporting literacy and digital inclusion, providing access to services, reducing social isolation and contributing towards local economic development and tourism. Perth and Kinross libraries perform strongly with high customer satisfaction, increasing footfall and a proven return on investment. However, despite these strengths, the current delivery model is no longer financially sustainable in its current form. Rising costs, constrained funding and changing patterns of use mean that continuing the current model without reform would require ongoing additional investment without addressing longer-term viability. In response, the report presents a comprehensive appraisal of 8 delivery options, ranging from maintaining current provision through to service reductions, consolidation and alternative delivery models. These options have been assessed against statutory compliance, financial sustainability, community impact, deliverability and strategic alignment. The outcome of this appraisal identifies option 2, the Community Services Hub model, as the preferred approach. The model retains libraries as a core statutory service, while repositioning them as multi-purpose community hubs, integrating a broader range of services, including wellbeing, learning, culture and community activity. It builds on existing place-based approaches, strengthens partnerships, and enables a more flexible and demand-led service tailored to the different needs of Perth City, our rural towns and communities. Importantly, the recommended option avoids library closures, maintains access across communities and supports the Council's strategic priorities around prevention, inclusion and economic development. It also reflects extensive engagement with communities, which has demonstrated strong support for enhancing and sustaining local library provision rather than reducing it. The proposed model does, however, require a continued financial commitment, including recurring investment of £375,000 per annum from April 2027. This investment is presented in the context of protecting a statutory service, enabling transformation and delivering long-term value through outcomes and a more efficient integrated service delivery. Members are therefore invited to consider the findings of the report and approve the Community Services Hub model as the preferred option for the future of library services. This represents a balanced and forward-looking approach that maintains essential provision while creating the conditions for a more sustainable, resilient and impactful service for the future. Thank you. Helen Smout, Chief Executive of Culture Perth and Kinross, and Elaine Wallace, Library Manager from Culture Perth and Kinross, are also in attendance this morning, and we are happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacDonald. Are there any questions? Bailey.
Thank you very much, Provost, and thank you for the paper. It's very informative. My question is about paragraph 3.5 about the economic impact of the libraries. Just to clarify or confirm with officers, please, does anyone actually end up with £9.76 in their pocket, or is this the type of economic assessment that counts money multiple times as it passes through the economy? So are we looking at the figures here that represent, for example, that if we employ someone on £40,000, they might spend £10,000 of that locally, then that will also create further employment. So is it that style of analysis that's been performed here, please?
Yes, thank you for the question. So yeah, an independent piece of work was carried out by Culture Perth and Kinross to look at this. So it's not strict cash return, obviously, it's the wider impact that has. So that ranges from on-site staff spend right through to the wider well-being outcomes that are achieved. We all know that the activities and the services that are provided within our library, so it takes into account all those calculations as well.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson next.
Thank you, Provost, and thanks, Steve, for this very thorough report. What I thought was very helpful is on page 16, the contrast and compare with other local authorities in Scotland, and I'll come to that in terms of comments later. But could I just ask right now, what scope might exist for collaboration with other local authorities? I'm thinking in particular in areas such as procurement, but it could be with other, with events and so on. Are there any possibilities on that front? Thinking in particular with Angus and with Stirling, who have got a similar urban-rural, not dissimilar urban-rural split to us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm looking towards Helen and Elaine here, but I dare say a lot of this work probably happens already in terms of engaging with partners across the wider region to look at how we can deliver our services more effectively and impactfully, but also where we can potentially share resources as well. So that's something we can definitely look at. I wouldn't just restrict it to other library services as well. I think what we're proposing as part of this Community Services Hub model is to identify partners as well. So that could be across the wider kind of public and third sector, to see whether there's opportunities there to reduce costs and improve our service delivery as well. So I think a lot of the stuff that's happening, but there's absolutely scope to engage with other library providers in different local authority areas, but also wider partners as well.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. As a ward councillor who has a library that has been affected by this, over the past 3 years, the future of rural libraries has come to this council on a number of occasions. And whilst communities around these libraries have certainly been engaged and went above and beyond to try and save their libraries, we still seem to be no further forward with regards to the long-term future of the libraries. We're getting asked to recommend option number 2, which has a number of actually quite exciting aspects around it. But my question would be, in the coming future around this, if option 2 is selected, who will be responsible for implementing this, and how will council be updated on the progress of that? Because up till now, there's been a lot of talk and not much actually done.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, over the past year, maybe even slightly more, there has been an extensive period of community engagement, and myself, Helen, Elaine and Karen Johnson, amongst others, have been out and spoken. You know, the strength of feeling and passion for libraries has very much come through as part of that engagement process, and hopefully that's reflected in the paper as well. In terms of who will be leading this piece of work, libraries are statutory function of the local authority, so I think Perth and Kinross Council, but very much in partnership with Culture Perth and Kinross, will be leading on this piece of work. It's not easy, it will be quite difficult, and I don't think we're pretending it will be easy, and it'll take a bit of time and probably a bit of resource behind it as well, because it is a transformation project. So, you know, we may identify 1 or 2 areas, for example, to pilot this in, and if that was to work, we could roll it out across the region as well. So, you know, it will take a bit of time, but I think we'll take the lead, the council and Culture Perth and Kinross, to drive this forward, but we will be engaging with all our partners, and there'll be quite a lot of mapping out just to see how that would work. So again, there's examples in the paper around what's happened locally with the NHS, as well as wider field as well, in terms of how other areas have been engaged with the NHS, but there's other partners as well across the third sector. So we'll be leading on it, but we'll be very much be leaning on other people to help us deliver that. And we do anticipate that regular reports will come back to council as well. So in terms of how that's structured, like any transformation project, there'll be a programme board, there'll be an officer delivery group, and that will then be reported into the relevant public committee or council in terms of progress on an agreed basis. That could be every year, for example, but the members will be kept fully up to speed with the progress on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. My question is on the option 2, where it says potential for additional income and external funding. Have you identified any areas where potential income can be given, and any areas where external funding can be given?
Yeah, so I mean, I know CPK do access significant external funding at the moment and been very successful at doing that. Probably wouldn't like to kind of commit myself specifically to any funding sources just now, but I think by having that wider partnership model, that would be more attractive to external funders, people delivering that kind of integrated service delivery. So bringing a number of different partners could open a few doors to other sources of external funding as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Thanks. I've got 3 questions, but I'll take them one at a time and give everybody else a chance. So I just need some clarity here. Thanks for the report and everything. It's quite an extensive report. So just for clarification, over 2 years, well, in February 2025, we were faced with libraries closing. The council decided to put £500,000 and £500,000 over 2 years to look at a collaborative model with communities to make the library service more sustainable, and obviously that would involve not having to spend more money, I would have expected. So we then put in another 200,000, so that's 700,000, and now we're looking at putting a sum of 375,000 in, which is 50% more than what we were asked to put in the first place to maintain the service, and also to commit to having inflationary and pay award uplifts. Is that the position we've got to? And the follow-up, do we provide with to the other ALIOs the same terms that we provide inflationary and pay award uplifts?
Thank you. So I suppose just looking back on that funding that was committed previously, that was obviously for the whole of Culture Perth and Kinross. It wasn't just for the library services. So Culture Perth and Kinross obviously run the museum and the art gallery as well. So that was for to help with the whole of that budget shortfall. I think in terms of this paper, what we were specifically asked to do was come forward to council with a report on library services. So working with CPK, we've identified what those costs are, and there has been numerous reductions over the years. So we've kind of looked at the exact costs of what it costs to deliver a library service, and being quite honest in this report as well, in terms of this is a shortfall if we want to maintain current service provision. So without that funding, then services need to change. So I think we're presenting a picture that gives the real cost, and hopefully that's all kind of outlined within the paper. In terms of other ALIOs, that's not really, I suppose, for this. We were kind of specifically asked to bring a report on libraries and what the shortfall was.
But surely we're setting a precedent. The other ALIOs will be asking for exactly the same. If we're making a commitment in option 2 to fund any inflationary pressure or any pressure, pay award pressure, to be equitable, they could obviously ask for exactly the same terms. That's my concern.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Lane. I mean, you're right. In principle, they can ask for the same kind of treatment, but you remember that each ILO is presenting their own financial statement and position at for each financial year. So that will be considered as part of their, ask in terms of as part of the budget review process. Such.
Sorry, keep going, but no, I can't accept that as a reasoned answer. I'm sorry, Serge. If you're saying to CPK that we will fund, this is a big commitment you could be making for the council. If inflation goes up to 8%, we're going to have to 8% across the ALIOs for any inflationary pressure. And is that a commitment that we can make here today? That because we could then faced with the same thing if one of the other ALIOs say we're going to have to close this down because we've not got the same terms as we're providing to CPK. I think this is a big risk, and I don't think it's been addressed with your answer yet.
So the report is really focusing on library services. So that commitment will be for the library services and the costs which are highlighted in the report, not for the rest of the services Culture PK is delivering.
Either Thomas or somebody to tell me about why this isn't a precedent and it's not a risk, please.
I think you've had a good crack at it, Councillor Ling.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. Officers were set a task in terms of the budget, and I think at the time the funding that was given, there was an ask of officers to work alongside communities, consider the energy and the commitment of communities, work with CPK to plan and implement and present a sustainable future for library services. And I know, Councillor Lane, that was certainly your position at the time. Over the 2-year period, and I think one point that is important for elected members to consider here is we have a statutory responsibility for the provision of libraries in Perth and Kinross. We are a large rural area, and there has been fairly significant feedback from communities and indeed from elected members in the chamber that libraries is one thing that our communities really do want and really do need. So since that budget decision was made, I would say there hasn't been a pause. It's been used to do the detailed work, to do the required design work, to present today a number of options and fairly extensive community engagement, testing of delivery models and developing long-term set of options has been considered. What has been clear through the work that we've done is there is huge and strong support for libraries from elected members, but significantly from communities. But due to the funding challenges that we face, and I think the report clearly does set out that we are a very efficient model and that this is an underfunding within our library provision. You compare us and you benchmark us nationally, and our funding position is that we are more efficient than other libraries despite the geographical area. So the report that sits before you reflects these proposals and reflects the options that officers with CPK have considered. We absolutely understand, and I think the point that you're making here in terms of the wider funding challenges that ALIOs face will continue to be, and I don't know if our finance officer wants to comment on this, will continue to be debated and considered in the chamber through the budget setting process.
Mr.
Yes, so what we're trying to do in the report is set out the cost of providing the library service. If we don't build in the inflation bit for the library provision, we will be back here with potential options around with libraries in the future. So we're trying to future-proof library. That's what the 375 is about.
Take offline because we're not getting to that. Thanks.
I think that would be productive. Bailey Ahern.
Thank you. My question probably leads on from that because I've had to change it based on what was just discussed just then. So the case is that the 375,000 will only allow CPK to maintain the existing level of service and provision. It doesn't allow for any increase, any additional services, and potentially might lead to cuts in other parts of CPK services further down the line. Is that the case?
I think just this report focuses on the library services. I think we all understand that ALIOs as a whole have got wider financial challenges, and CPK is no different to that. But anything out with the library division will come forward as part of the budget review process, as is the norm. But this focuses specifically on maintaining our library service as it currently stands.
But do you agree that the 375,000 it leaves it as it exists at the moment? There will be no increase. There will be no improvement in services. It just leaves a level playing field as we are at the moment.
I think that the 375 does maintain that current provision and the current service. I think what we're proposing through the kind of place-based model is to make efficiencies, for example. So that could be looking at the wider estate, including our own estate, but partners as well, so that there could potentially be efficiencies in that, but also kind of integrating services as well. So I think what we're proposing without massive financial increase above the 375 is how can we work with partners and other council services, for example, to deliver services that would be more integrated and would therefore improve the services for customers across the whole.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peter Barrett next.
Sorry, Prof, my questions have been asked.
Thank you. Bailey next.
Thank you, Provost. My question is about numbers, but numbers of a different kind. So it's helpful within the report that we're given the figures for the uplift in library patronage, in-person patronage specifically, over the last, over sort of half-year periods and very relatively recent periods. However, what I was looking for in the paper and I couldn't find was anything that gives us the overall trend of in-person library visits over, let's say, 5 or 10 or 7 years. Do officers have to hand at all, or can they characterise at all, even in qualitative terms, what the overall trend is in-person library visits across the piece over the longer term? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe invite Helen to come up and answer that one. I think obviously just by Helen's coming up within the paper, we've kind of focused on that footfall over the last 4 years because obviously the pandemic was, so that it didn't give a kind of maybe fair comparison. So that was the reason we focused on the 4 years. But maybe Helen wanted to say something on that.
Yes, so thank you. The last, what we're seeing is a year-on-year increase in library use since the pandemic. Pandemic was a year where nobody used their libraries and not very much else inside. So whilst if we look further back, we see that we are still below where we were pre-pandemic in terms of footfall numbers. There are reasons for that, which include different ways in which people use their library service. You don't have to come into the library to renew your books as often as you used to. You used to have to do that in person. You can now do it online. You don't have to come in other ways. However, since the pandemic, we have seen year-on-year increase and a further 4%, I think, this year on last year. It is continuing to climb and improve overall every single year. So we are working hard to engage audiences, lapsed members. I think the process over the last couple of years, the uncertainty has made some people perhaps not sure whether the library is going to be open or not or whatever. So there's quite a lot of work going on to re-engage people, but we are seeing that trend continue, and the first couple of months of this year so far seem to suggest that it's continuing to grow as well.
Just a very short follow-up to that. Roughly what percentage of pre-COVID levels are we at in that case, please? Sorry, Helen, to drag you back.
I would have to go back and look at the exact figure.
I think the microphone's gone off.
Sorry, I'd have to go back and look at the exact figures and get those for you, but we were around about 520,000 pre-pandemic, and we're about 420,000 visits a year now. But as I say, that is continuing to increase.
Thank you. Councillor Kigali next.
Just a question about costing. So option 2 is costed as revenue only at 375k with no mention of capital expenditure like there is in option 3. But then the 3 case studies that they're built on are quite vague about how they achieved that. I just wanted to confirm that there's no surprises lying ahead in terms of capital expenditure that, or I've missed it and they're somewhere else.
No, there are no further asks on that, and I think that would be part of the transformation project. And if it's a little bit vague, I think it's probably just where we're at the moment, because it will need a bit of time and resource put into see how it would work in a particular area. So there is no ask or no surprises beyond that. But obviously, looking for support and funding, even externally, would form part of that process.
Okay, Councillor Ling, I do have you down for further questions, but I'm going to go to some of the other people on the list first, okay? Councillor Collins Stewart next, please.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Thanks very much for the report. Clearly been a huge amount of work going into developing the options appraisal. One of the things that maybe the report doesn't cover in as much detail is we've seen obviously a significant uptick in footfall, but also Ms. Smout just referred to the action plans that have been developed over the last couple of years. I just wondered, how have we quantified how much effort has gone into that in terms of, particularly from the community, how many people we've engaged with, how many hours have gone into that, how many hours have gone into delivering the increased events? So we've had author talks, for example. I just wondered if is that volunteer effort, if you like, part of that £1 for £9.67, or is what's the quantum of that community effort that's gone in?
So I can respond to that and confirm a lot of effort has went in, a lot of hours, and a lot of people have been involved in this process, which is really positive, and I think shows how people feel about the library services. That's not a figure that we have. I don't have that offhand, but we probably can do that calculation because everything was recorded in terms of who was in attendance and whatnot. We've tried to give a flavour in the report of some of the examples of activity that have happened since we've had that engagement, but I dare say more activity will happen on the back of that, and that would form part of the report and we talked about earlier. But that's information we can definitely try and find out and quantify.
Thank you. Councillor Duff next.
Thank you, Provost. Excuse me. Thanks very much. I welcome the paper and support the improved shared use of our libraries as suggested. However, I'm just wondering, is there a likelihood that we might need to rationalise book space within our libraries in order to achieve more shared space for this model?
I think the answer to that is that we would look at the space that we have. What we don't want to do is reduce in a very small library the number of books that people have access to. That's always going to be a core part of what libraries do and an important part of why we have them. But I think we've got quite a lot of libraries which are open for only a few hours every week, which are actually sitting empty for the rest of that week and could be utilised, the space could be utilised So there might need to be some investment in furniture which can be easily moved. So it creates more space. It might be that we work with community groups to use part of the library space that isn't utilised in some of our bigger libraries. There might be options to do that. But that's the work of the next stage now, is how we start to do that. We have been working with community groups to allow access to libraries out with our opening hours, and that's been going quite successfully. We've got a number of different libraries where that's used very well, some that are just starting down that journey. So we know there's a demand and we know that we can do it. So we would always try and protect what the core provision is for libraries, because that's really important, but there is scope to expand and use space differently.
Thank you. Councillor Carr next.
Thank you. We've heard how there's been community engagement, and the communities have certainly sounds like they've rallied round, and the footfall has increased, which is very promising. And we've also heard of action plans. So my question would really be, what areas of the current library model have been identified where changes can be made to provide financial advantages and financial savings for the library model moving forward?
I think it's been difficult to identify financial savings, and that's why we tried to be quite honest in this report around the resource that we'll need to deliver services as they currently stand. As part of the action plans, there's been lots around how we increase the use of the libraries, and again we've kind of put some examples within the report, but there's lots of events and inviting different groups, a lot of marketing and communications around libraries. So we have I don't think we've identified any kind of financial savings at this stage, although that's something we'd look at obviously as part of the kind of community services hub model. But I think the action plans are really focused on how can we increase footfall and in turn the value, and it goes back to that kind of economic impact assessment in terms of the role that libraries play within local communities.
Okay, Councillor Lane, one question.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Actually, just about asked all the questions, so I'll just pivot further. Hopefully, with co-location, will increase footfall as well. Is it planned to have council services co-located in some of these buildings, which then would provide a saving if we didn't have to have other buildings used for council purposes? And that the saving there, the council could reinvest in libraries and moving forward. Is that a possibility? And just for my ignorance, somebody may be able to clear up, if we move council services to co-locate within the libraries, will that affect the rates that have to be paid on the building? Because it wouldn't then just be totally a PKC. But so that's just a question that somebody else might know the answer of.
Okay, I'll maybe ask the first part of that and maybe invite our Chief Financial Officer to answer the second part of that. So I think, yes, absolutely, that's something we'd want to look at in terms of that co-location of services, both council and other partners as well. And we've tried to make those examples within the paper. So I don't want to definitely commit to that today, but I certainly know within my own area, skills and employability support is something that we can definitely look at. I mean, some of the stuff does happen already, I would stress, but there's more we can do. So within my area, I think skills and employability support to me aligns really closely with what libraries offer. So that is one area, for example, we could look at, but I'll maybe invite Scott to answer that second.
I believe Mr. Walker is going to answer the rates point, and Mr. Beveridge is going to provide an example of Pitlochry as well.
I'll allow Mr. Walker to answer the question on the rates, but in terms of other services, I think that there definitely is potential. If we are using this community model, then what that potential allows is for other facilities that we no longer require to be rationalised. Now, that could free up opportunities for other corporate priorities in terms of affordable housing or other needs within the community. So the real potential with this community hub model is what we're saying basically. I think everybody is aware that it's not a short-term fix. It is going to be a bit longer term, but that works with our strategic thinking going forward, that longer term planning in terms of what we do with our assets and the services we can provide. So this is actually quite exciting in terms of an offer going forward.
So in terms of the rates, it depends. It'll be on an individual case-by-case basis. It'll determine on the lease It depends on who's in there. So if there's other charities, that will help our position. If there are other council services, there'll need to be a discussion. Our colleagues in local taxes would work with CPK to understand who's using it, what it's been used for, to maximise the benefit to CPK.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions, and therefore I'm just going to thank officers for their answers, and Helen Smout also for joining and answering questions today as well. And now I'm going to invite the Leader of the Council to move the report.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning, colleagues. I'm pleased to move this report on the future of library services in Perth and Kinross. Libraries are at the very heart of our communities. They support literacy and learning, provide digital access, promote health and well-being, and act as welcoming, inclusive spaces for people of all ages. They're also delivering real value economically, socially, and culturally, with strong performance, growing footfall, and clear evidence of the return they generate for our communities. However, we must also recognise the reality we face. The current model is not financially sustainable in the long term without continued investment. After significant efficiencies over many years, there is very limited scope to make further savings without impacting on services or access. That is why this report is so important. It sets out a range of options, carefully assessed, and identifies a clear and evidence-based preferred approach, the Community Services Hub model. This model allows us to protect our statutory library service while transforming how it is delivered. It builds on what we already do well, while strengthening partnership working, improving the use of our buildings, and better aligning services with the needs of our communities. Importantly, it avoids the significant negative impacts associated with service reductions or closures, which would affect access, equality, and community well-being. So this is about making the right long-term choice. It is about investing wisely in a service that supports inclusion, skills, and opportunity. It is about ensuring that our libraries continue to evolve, remaining relevant, resilient, and accessible in the years ahead. And it is about recognising that libraries are not a cost to be managed, but an asset to be strengthened. So to the Save Our Libraries campaigners, I say this loudly and unequivocally. You have passionately made your views on the protection and improvement of libraries very clear over a number of years. We have heard you and we have listened to you. Within the constraints of available funding each year at budget time, we have always managed to come up with funding to get us through the next year. Today, if Council supports the recommendations, this represents a longer-term commitment not only to sustain our library assets, but to further develop them and the services they house in the years ahead. The pace of these enhancements will, of course, be determined by the level of funding we are able to apply to this work in those years ahead. I therefore commend this report to Council and move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I now invite Councillor McEwen to second the report.
Thank you very much, Provost. I'm happy to second this paper. Library provision in our communities is obviously one thing that is very important and is held dear by our communities. I think that in the example that we've seen over the last couple of years, we've had 5 different action groups in the communities where libraries were threatened to come forward and develop action plans and put lots of effort. I think that if that model had been challenged in other areas, say like Blair Gowrie, where the library wasn't at threat, I think you would get exactly the same response from our communities. Our communities want libraries at the heart of their community, and they want to use them in multiple ways so that they stay viable. We therefore, as a council, have a responsibility, I feel, to ensure that those libraries are properly financed and provisioned to provide those services to our communities. I think this is a movement and a model and an investment for opportunity. I think different libraries in different parts of Perth and Kinross provide different services to their communities in different ways, and that flexibility and that opportunity is something that this paper and this funding allows to happen, and is extremely important and is very obviously very important to our communities as well, and it's something we should be funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McEwen. Bailey McLaren with the first comment.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, in these challenging financial times, identifying a solution for the retention of library services, particularly rural services, is important, not only to the direct service, but the indirect benefits to the local community and community viability. In my ward, Burnham, in my ward, the Burnham Library is located within the Burnham Arts building. And undoubtedly, if this library service was to be withdrawn, this would impact greatly on the sustainability of Burnham Arts, a vibrant local community space. And I do support the recommendations within the paper. Over the time of the library review process, a great deal of effort, time and social energy has been focused on finding a solution to retain library services. These efforts have displayed clearly the community ask to find a sustainable solution, and I thank all involved who have taken part in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McLaren. Bailey next.
Thank you very much, Provost. I'll start by remarking it would be lovely to have a library available to save in my ward of the Castle Gowrie. This is another area where my residents miss out, and I think they miss out as a result of being the rope in a centuries-long civic tug-of-war between Dundee and Perth, but that's a different issue. And don't worry, I'm not about to propose a new library for Errol or Instore today, and I'm pleased to report that the regular library bus visits are well communicated about on the local WhatsApp groups. Back to the main question. This is indeed a difficult one. I'm dwelling here for a moment on the fact that patronage is still 20% lower in our libraries than pre-pandemic. That's 1/5 lower. Before we commit more taxpayer cash, therefore, the key question here on the table is whether this is a situation where people have maybe voted with their feet. Maybe we don't need as many libraries given the patronage is down 20% compared to pre-pandemic. However, I'm pleased to see the cloud has a silver lining, and the threat of closure has galvanised communities in such a positive way, and we're seeing promising results in recent years in terms of that number upticking. And it's for that reason that I'll be supporting option 2, but hopefully this investment and commitment results in a sustainable ongoing increase in visitor numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. Councillor Rebeck next, please.
Thank you very much, Provost. I like a library. I like a physical book. The library was really important to me, particularly when my family were young, actually. And that includes a lot of the wider services that are available in the library. In my case, it was probably chocolate cake and coffee, but other services are available. And I think the point here is it's not just me that likes a library and a book and the wider services. There's thousands of people across Perth and Kinross that also like the library. I think elected members are quite right to comment and ask about the costs, because it is real money and we will have to find it as a council somewhere. And while option 2 doesn't save the council any money, I think it does. The community hub model, I think, does offer opportunities to get better value for that money, and it further puts our libraries at the centre of their communities, which I think is the right thing to do. And so I will be supporting option 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebeck. Councillor Ling.
And just for clarity, I support option 2 as well. I think there's been a lot of work done, and we have had a lot of input, and hopefully it's ongoing input, and we continue to move on and just don't draw a line under things here and go back to what was happening before. I still will reiterate my concern about the statement that we're committing to fund inflationary rises and pay awards to this service moving forward. It's taken away the budget setting up for the next council that they're going to have to be dealing with this while facing probably much more stringent conditions. We see that there's no point in us thinking we're going to get more money from the UK government, Scottish government down here. We're going to have to make decisions that are more and more difficult moving on, and to commit ourselves to funding pay awards and inflation that we've got no control over, to me, I think is folly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ling. Councillor Collins, you're next, please.
Thanks, Provost. At the start of the last council term, I was briefly on the board of Culture Perth and Kinross, and remember getting a tour of the A.K. Bell Library from Helen. And what surprised me, having for a period of time not set a foot in a library for years, was just how much the library was used as a safe space. It was used to help vulnerable people, how the librarians effectively became social workers in some cases. We often complain, or not complain, we often see in our communities that where there is volunteering going on, it's the same people over and over again doing volunteering in different groups. Certainly a lot of the community stalwarts in my ward, in Ayleth and Scone, have come out in support of the library campaign, but I've also seen people come out in support of the library campaigns who aren't involved in other things. And I think that goes to demonstrate just how loved our libraries and librarians are by our communities. They're vital community hubs. I hear what Councillor Ling says about the inflationary pressures in the future and the costs. But if you take that £1 for every pound spent, we're getting £9.67 or 76, whatever it is, back. That's not just as Bailey was driving at an economic impact, it's a social value impact. I would count this investment as preventative spend for our communities, money that would otherwise spending that would otherwise increase in other areas such as health and social care, but would be hidden and masked by not being directly linked with removal of these vital community service hubs from our communities. And I'm fully in support of option 2.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Provost. Councillor Carr referred to the position over the last 3 years, but I actually think we should look at the position since 2016, over the last 10 years. And frankly, funding of our library service has often been ad hoc, almost hand to mouth. And I think that's reflected on page 16 of this report. We've seen over those 10 years, and there have been, I think the efficiencies have been considerable on the part of Culture Perth and Kinross, but you can only go so far. We've seen staffing levels cut 45% to 34 employees, just under 34 full-time equivalent. Funding has declined by more than 38% in real terms. So my own view, and I think the contrast and compare there with other local authorities is really rather revealing. I thought in particular the 4.6, the recurring spend on materials in libraries, including book funds, events and reader development activities such as summer reading challenges, is also low in comparison to other areas. 92 pence per 1,000 population. And you contrast that with Stirling at £2.41. You contrast that with Edinburgh at 159 or Glasgow, I think at 152 pence. I almost take the view it's now we've got to the point this far and no further. I totally welcome this report. I can obviously appreciate we're working under financial constraints, but I think Councillor Stewart makes a good comment here about the cost benefit analysis and the overall benefit of libraries to our communities. I totally welcome the option 2, the hub model, and that will develop over a period of time. But what we must be aiming for is a library service that is not just adequate, but if possible is beyond adequate, in accord with the Scottish Library and Information Council. Or finally, what I think we've seen over the last 2 years is just how much local communities, especially in rural Perthshire, really support their libraries. I've seen that in Comrie, the Friends of Comrie Library, but we can also see it in Scone and Aelith, in Otterarder and up at Burnham. Libraries really do matter. They're not just about books, they are about a wider hub model and community services. But also, let's not forget, libraries are about books in both the printed version and also the digital side of things, and where I think Culture PK has been very successful. I totally support this report and option 2, and at least it now gives, I think, much greater certainty for going forward, and that's been lacking. I think it's certainty for local communities. It's also given greater certainty to the staff of Culture Perth and Kinross, who I think have really had it difficult in terms of morale over the last few years. I think it marks, hopefully, a new chapter for our library services. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Peter Barrett next, please.
Thanks, Provost. I'm a regular library book borrower, so I've got more than just a kind of academic interest in libraries and library provision. I think it's really important to recognise the commitment that this council makes to libraries across Perth and Kinross. And I think that commitment financially comes to something like £8.7 million a year. We're about to increase that to over £9 million a year. So I think that does demonstrate elected members' recognition of the public's support and the public's value and appreciation of what libraries provide in their community. And as we've heard from a number of elected members, you know, that goes beyond just the simple provision of books that I use myself. However, you know, I think we have to avoid creating sacred cows. And I think whilst the public may have huge appreciation and value of the role of libraries, I think that there are still significant financial challenges that we as a council and the rest of the public sector face. And I think that there are clear and obvious operational efficiencies and savings that Culture Perth and Culture Perth and Kinross can make in other areas of their operations, and where they can be driving greater profit and income from parts of those operations. And we need to see, Helen, bluntly, those operations turn around if we're going to continue to protect libraries and fund them to the extent that we are doing, because if the rest of Perth and Kinross Council is year on year having to look at efficiencies and savings both in management and frontline services, then our alios can't be any different. And I appreciate that it is very difficult to see where to go to get those savings, but I do share some of Councillor Ling's concerns that the interpretation of paragraph 5.5 isn't carte blanche to say that inflation will have no impact on CPK operations in the future. But very much support option 2, and I think that what this council is doing today is demonstrating how responsive it can be to communities' concerns over future library provision, and putting that on a firm footing so that we don't have the annual budget cycle of trying to pass on savings and the disaster scenario savings options that come back to us. Hopefully that this will end that for the future, and also bring about a more modernised service that communities can use to far better utility and extent.
Thank you, Councillor Peter Barrett. Councillor Liz Barrett next.
Thank you, Provost. I'll be brief. I support the recommendation for option 2, and I look forward to this exciting opportunity for our libraries playing a much greater role in providing services, training, fellowship and local involvement to residents across our communities and to our visitors. And I do hope that they will become more financially secure and sustainable in the future. In the meantime, I'd like to ask that Culture Perth and Kinross do work more closely with the Council and particularly our communications team on planning and communication to support CPK's re-engagement activities, but also so that events and activities in our libraries are promoted more effectively and in good time, both to residents and to councillors, so that we can share them more widely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor McCall next, please.
Thank you, Provost. I wish to thank officers and Culture Perth and Kinross for the amount of effort that's gone into producing this report, and particularly in the case studies and the examples it provided. It's very thorough and it's very easy to read, which is also equally important. Thank you for that. My comments on this report is that I am wholly supportive of option 2. I think that libraries shouldn't be seen as transactional spaces, but they're actually spaces where people can learn, particularly children. We have to remember that in many of our areas there are people who are digitally disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged, and this may be for some of our members of our communities the only access they have to sources of reference and to information, etc. I was intrigued by Councillor Bailey's comments about the mobile library. I was travelling through to Dundee earlier this week or last week, and I ended up behind a mobile library service, and I recalled that for many of my relatives who do live in rural communities, mobile library service was like a lifeline service for them in many respects. It shouldn't be considered as a second-class option. In fact, many of them felt that it was a better option because not only did they get their library books and sometimes some other services added in terms of news and information about neighbours and bits of local interest, but also it was it provided them with a way of keeping in touch with other people, and those people who work in the mobile library service, whether they're drivers or I'm not sure what the headcount is like, they in themselves should be commended for the fantastic work that they do. So I full-heartedly support this motion and this recommendation, and I thank as well my colleagues who have worked so hard to bring this motion to the Council today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCall. I don't see any further comments, so Councillor Leader, do you wish to sum up at all?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, are we happy to agree the report? Good. Thank you very much. Members, we're going to take a 10-minute comfort break back at 11:25. Good morning, councillors. Welcome back to this morning's full council meeting. I believe Councillor Keith Allen has been able to join remotely, so we're just going to check that he is able to hear us and is present in the meeting.
I am present.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. We now move on to item 6, which is the draft visitor levy scheme for Perth and Kinross for statutory public consultation. And I'm going to invite Kirsty Easton, the business growth team leader, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning, councillors. Today's report seeks approval to proceed to formal public consultation on a draft visitor levy scheme for Perth and Kinross. It's important to be clear at the outset that Council is not being asked today to introduce a visitor levy. Rather, members are being asked whether the draft scheme should be consulted upon so that residents, businesses, visitors and stakeholders can provide their views before any final decision is made. Members will recall that in February 2025, Council agreed to undertake an extensive programme of early engagement to explore whether and how a visitor levy could be implemented in Perth and Kinross. That engagement involved residents, businesses, accommodation providers and visitors, and generated significant feedback which has helped shape the draft scheme before you today. Since that engagement took place, the Scottish Parliament has passed the Visitor Levy Scotland Amendment Act with cross-party support. The amendments were developed following representations from local authorities and tourism industry stakeholders and introduce greater flexibility in how a levy can be applied, including the option of a fixed rate approach. The additional flexibility has enabled officers to develop a draft scheme which seeks to address many of the issues raised during the early engagement process. Tourism is an important part of Perth and Kinross economy, supporting jobs, businesses and communities across our urban and rural areas. The draft scheme therefore seeks to explore whether additional investment can be secured to support visitor infrastructure, destination development, community priorities and long-term sustainability of the visitor economy. The draft scheme sets out how a visitor levy could operate in Perth and Kinross, including the proposed levy model, exemptions, governance arrangements and how any future revenues could be reinvested. It also reflects the statutory requirement that any income generated must be reinvested in facilities and services that support visitors and communities in which they stay. Importantly, the draft scheme has been informed by stakeholder engagement, independent economic analysis and consideration of emerging experience elsewhere in Scotland. The report highlights both the opportunities and potential impacts associated with a visitor levy and recognises that there are a range of views on the proposals. Following consultation, officers will analyse all responses and report the findings back to Council alongside any recommended amendments to the scheme. It would then be for Council to decide whether or not a visitor levy shall ultimately be adopted in Perth and Kinross. Today's decision, therefore, is about whether Council wishes to proceed with the statutory consultation process and seek the views of those that would be affected by the proposals. The draft scheme is intended to provide a framework for that discussion, and feedback received through consultation will inform any final scheme brought back to Council for consideration before any decision on implementation is taken. Thank you, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I have a first question from Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Provost. Definitely first of many questions, I'm afraid, on this paper. Thanks for the report, Kirsty. I have to say I found it very easy to read and also grateful for the early sight of the economic impact assessment, which was also very easy to read. At every discussion we've had about this, both here and in briefings for all members and a private briefing in our own ward, I've asked specifically about how the questions in the proposed consultation will be framed, and I had hoped that we might see them as part of the document pack. They're not there. You may remember I also asked if we would be including a question which was a simple yes or no, should we proceed with this scheme or not, on the basis that, a phrase I've used many times, he who sets the questions controls the answer. So can I ask, why are the questions for the proposed questions not available for us to look at? Will elected members be involved in producing those questions? And can I have a commitment that one of the questions will be, do we proceed with a visitor levy scheme or do we not?
Serge?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Forbes. So because we asked councillors today to agree or not to go for a public consultation, the consultation and the questionnaire will be based on the scheme which is detailed in the report. So there will be specific questions on each element of the scheme. So for instance, there will be specific question on the fixed rate. There will be a specific question on the level of that fixed rate. There will be a specific question on the exemptions and so on and so on. So the questionnaire will be built and structured around these very specific questions to effectively have the views of the people, communities, the residents, the businesses on this specific, element. So that will be effectively taking through the people answering the question through that kind of flow of questions. At the end of the questionnaire, there will be a question which will be about their support or not to the visitor levy. So that question will be asked at the end of the questionnaire. We have not provided the detail of the questions because it is quite, as you said, we have to be very careful in how it is structured and built in terms of the questions and the flow of the questions. So people not get lost in the questionnaire as well. So it's not provided today, but we will work on on the questionnaire to effectively make sure that each question is asked, and there are options in terms of responses
and there will be also questions or if they support or not what's proposed.
Thank you for that reassurance. Can I ask, therefore, why the yes or no question shouldn't be at the front? Because if someone just fundamentally disagrees with this proposal, what's the point in asking them any further detailed questions? Surely they could just say no and then move on with their life.
The reason for that is because when we went through the engagement, early engagement, the answers were quite diverse. So people may say, well, I'm not supporting a percentage levy, but I'm supporting a fixed rate levy. And people will say, well, I'm supporting a levy, but not a certain type of accommodation. Or people will say, so you've got different views, and they are not always, yes or no. So that's why I think it's important to get through, the different questions, so people can make their views known for each of the questions. But at the end, taking all of this into account, they still have their views, and so they will be able to give their views, when they have been through, the different questions.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Next.
Thank you, Provost. Can I ask about? I think we've all had emails from residents asking about the impact this will have on affordable tourism. For example, the cost of a tent pitch or a site and a mobile home site. The percentage, will be much higher for those sort of holiday makers than it would be for someone staying in a hotel, for example, and may make this is a very, very popular area for people taking that type of holiday. So have you any ideas as yet how we might deal with that? The fact that it will be much more expensive for people taking these sort of holidays if we propose a levy?
Thank you for your question. Yes, we do acknowledge that, and at the moment we are putting forward a fixed rate scheme, which means that everyone in terms of accommodation will pay the same price. But as part of this consultation process, we'll take on that feedback, and if that means we have to amend the scheme that comes back before council, then we can do that. So this is part of the consultation process, is to get the views of all accommodation providers, and we have the flexibility within the legislation and the guidance to make those changes before we bring anything back to council.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Braun next.
Thanks, Provost. My question relates to exemptions, and specifically to disabled people and the mechanism you're using. According to the paper here, someone who's disabled in receipt of specific benefits would have to pay the levy at the point of use, that's at the hotel or bed and breakfast, and subsequently claim that back from PKC by sending in, as I understand it, proof of their receipt of that specific benefit. For ease of use, surely would it not be easier simply to produce that proof at point of use at the hotel and therefore not have to pay the levy at all? That seems to be an unnecessary burden on people to have to go through all this paperwork to get their money back, where it would simply be a case of showing proof at that point of use and not having to pay the levy in the first place.
Thank you. No, I appreciate your question. So, for example, that is part of the statutory guidance that's been set. So, for example, you would have to claim that back from the council. It also saves the burden on the administrative burden on the business as well, that would have to then take that information on board. It also gives a bit of privacy to the client as well, without having to share personal information with that business. So it's easier for them to claim back through the local authority.
Bailey next, please.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you for the paper. I had to do a bit of a double take when I was reading this over the weekend and reread it, and just wanted to check my understanding that this tax that we're putting on will then be subject to tax in its own right in the form of VAT being approved afterwards. I think I've understood that correctly, but my question to officers is, would we be open to any kind of future legal challenge on that? Because I can't think of any other situation in the UK tax system where I get taxed on another tax. Has there been some reading of this to confirm that that doesn't leave us open to future action? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Billy. Yes, you're correct. So the VAT will be applied to the visitor levy And this is the current HMRC interpretation. So we have virtually no leeway there in terms of how the interpretation is made. Now, I suppose with visitor levy being approved across, Scotland and maybe the UK, there may be some pressure or some kind of, lobbying to HMRC in terms of reviewing that interpretation. But at the moment, that what is the case.
Thank you, Councillor Kigali. Next.
I'm slightly confused why the council proceeding with £4 a night as its consultation reference point when the EIA provides a model scenario for £3 and £5, but then only an uncosted range for £4. Unless I'm missing something, it does look like being asked to consult on the one rate that the council's own officers didn't fully cost. I may be wrong, but that's how it appears.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Kigali. So the current draft scheme is identifying £4 as a reference point for the consultation, as a kind of reference point, with £3 and £5 as options, or to have the views. In the economic impact assessment, you've got effectively how much £4 levy will raise, and so you have that information. Unless I've not really understood your question, is it another element that you wanted to query?
It seems like the £4 gets an estimated at around 2.5 to 4%, without the same level of modelling as the £3 and £5 it appears. And it appears like the modelling's been done on those two, and they've kind of just chosen a midpoint. But I just wanted clarity on whether the same modelling has been done on all of the options.
Yes, the same modelling has been, the same methodology and modelling has been done for all of the options.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Kirsty, for your report. It's incredibly well written and good. My question just relates to, and I'm fully supportive of this measure, to be honest with you, but to section 4.2 and section 4.3, where you discuss the designation of a fixed rate approach. And I kind of understand some of the arguments to it, but could you just go into a wee bit more detail about the 3 points, particularly the second 2 points in 4.2, as how much reduced administrative complexity there'll be, and the greater certainty of income? It appears that we've maybe jumped to this on the weight of some of the responses from the first consultation. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. So as part of the early engagement, a lot of businesses gave feedback that it would be easier for them to administer if it was a fixed rate, so they knew exactly what they were charging rather than it being a percentage. And I think it gives that greater income support as well in terms of how much they're raising and what they have to give back to the council. I don't know, I wasn't part of that early engagement. If Steve, you have anything you want to add on that, sorry.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Kirsty said. So that did come through loud and clear as part of the early engagement. I think we all understand that the pressures that the tourism hospitality sector is under at the moment. So that administrative burden was certainly within the top 2 or 3 issues that were raised. But not only that, locally, I think we obviously engage in Suzanne's part of kind of national networks as well, and that was a common theme across the country, and that then reflected, I think, the amendment to the bill. So we've reflected local opinion, but also similar across the country as well.
Follow up if possible, Professor. Just the comment I was wanted to make, followed on from Councillor Robertson's comment, because there is just by a fixed rate, it automatically burdens kind of lower priced places as well too, and that was my point with that. But okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Provost. My question's on paragraph 540 on page 65, and based on the figures in that paragraph and the gross value added figure, GVA figure of £327 million, £3 per night would raise £5.85 million for the council. But if my calculation is right, a 2% reduction in GVA would remove £6.55 million and 140 jobs potentially from the visitor economy. The £4 a night rate could bring in £8 million in revenue for the council, but a 4% reduction in GVA could remove over £13 million and 280 jobs from the visitor economy. And I think that's hardly the modest effect as stated in the paragraph. Surely we can't be advocating the introduction of a visitor levy which will have such a potentially detrimental impact on our visitor economy. So based on the economic impact assessment done by 56 Degree North, would you agree that the visitor levy as proposed will remove more money from the visitor economy and result in job losses than will raise for the council? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Duff. If you obviously look at the economic impact assessment, you know, there is obviously a negative impact on the GVA by introducing a levy, but there's also a positive impact because this money is reinvested into the sector, and itself it is effectively generating more jobs and more GVA. So there is a counterbalance there in terms of positive and negative. These are all based on modeling. So you know, the methodology is explained in how this has been calculated, but it's true there will be a negative but also a positive impact of the levy.
Sorry for Professor, we could just have a follow-up then. So based on the £4 a night levy, the economic impact assessment confirms or proposes that £8 million in revenue could be raised, but potentially over £13 million could be lost. Is my calculation accurate on that basis then?
Chris, are we able to call you in to answer this question? Please.
Yeah, this is Chris Greenwood's Senior Research Fellow at the Moffat Centre for Travel and Tourism Business Development.
Sorry, can you speak up a bit, please, because we're finding it hard to hear you in the chamber.
Hello, is that better?
That is better, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Chris Green.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Chris Greenwoods, Senior Research Fellow at the Moffat Centre for Travel and Tourism Business Development at Glasgow Caledonian University, and we were commissioned by Perth and Kinross Council to undertake the economic impact analysis. The figures that were generated were based on the level of tourism that was measured in 2024. So should the levy have been run against the levy rates that are shown, this would have been the gross levy revenue generated and the net proceeds and the FTE jobs that would have been supported. In terms of the shift in GVA down the way, clearly consumer behaviour does move. However, the overall movement in GVA would not necessarily be at the same levels that were discussed, say, a 4% drop.
Sorry, Provost, thanks for the answer and apologies for attributing the analysis to 56 Degrees North. It should have been yourself at Moffat Centre. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Colin Stewart next.
Thanks, Provost. Thanks to officers for the report and to the Moffat Centre. Councillor Duff asked almost word for word what I was going to ask. So I'm going to just follow up that with quoting from the economic impact assessment. I think we heard there from that it was difficult to calculate the reduction in the gross value added, the GVA, but there is an estimate for approximately 2% in the economic impact assessment. And as an aside, one thing that struck me was that it appeared to be easy to calculate or it appears to be much easier to calculate positive economic impact than it does to calculate negative economic impact. So we've had economic impact assessments of our, winter late nights in the past, and we can calculate apparently with certainty what the positive economic impact of this is, but it seems from the description in the report that it's more difficult to calculate negative economic impact. But I want to follow up Councillor Duff's question by asking specifically about this approximate 2% reduction in GVA and why that doesn't equal why that figure that Councillor Duff quoted isn't therefore a reliable indicator of how much money we will take out of the Perth and Kinross visitor economy with a 4%, a £4 tourist tax.
Chris, can I call upon you to answer that one, please?
Yep. So I think we're referring to the elements of the analysis, which was the price elasticity of demand. So the introduction of a levy is clearly an unknown quantity in terms of what impacts consumers will have on this. Research that has been done globally on the introduction of visitor levies and tourism taxes has shown that there is a varied response. So, for example, most European tourists or travellers, there is an expectation that there will be some kind of levy, and therefore there is little resistance to that. For the domestic markets, there's not been a introduction of a visitor levy until now. However, there has been extensive media coverage both in Scotland and now in the rest of the UK about the introduction, and therefore it's much more a part of the consumer discussion. We applied figures that were provided by the Scottish Government, so these are consistent across multiple local authority areas that are undertaking this type of analysis within Scotland, using figures for price elasticity of demand. So this is estimates of how sensitive visitors would be to price change. So the central multiplier, if you like, for this suggests that for every 1% increase in the total cost of a visit, demand could drop by 0.85%. So if there is a greater or lesser movement by consumers to the introduction of visitor levy, that would then provide the shift. So in the central scenario that we had, which was a £3 visitor levy with the recommended price elasticity of demand of 0.85%, that would suggest that from what would be a baseline levy introduced, there would be a 2% change in the central scenario and the subsequent jobs. However, that does result in a net levy raised of the 5.8 million. So it's a reflection of trying to estimate consumer behaviour change. This can obviously vary. It may be that visitors may not have a huge impact and will pay the price, and therefore that central scenario might be more towards the low sensitivity and therefore would generate a greater level. But there is also one for a higher, more price conscious figure as well, which provides that range, and therefore it was done for due diligence purposes.
Thanks very much for that answer. So I think the comparison with the European tourists is useful, but isn't it also the case that in European countries the tourist tax would be a delineated item on their bill, Whereas here, when hotel services or accommodation services are pricing a stay, they would have to include it in the total. And also, there's a difference between here and continental Europe in that we have a much higher VAT rate. A lot of those companies, a lot of those countries actually have a much lower value-added tax than, particularly for the hospitality industry, than we do in the UK. Is that correct?
Chris, are you able to answer that, please?
Yeah, certainly. So, yes, so within the UK, clearly we have a centralised value-added tax system, whereas for other areas, particularly Europe, it may be more federalised. And therefore, whilst it may be that there is a lower value-added tax on tourism and hospitality in some European countries, there may be additional sales tax, so there could be regional taxes. If you take the US, for example, it may be that there is county, state and federal tax, as well as visitor levy or tourism tax that will be applied. I think having clarity in terms of how the levy is presented is important to the consumer, certainly in this initial period of implementation for any local authority. But this is where having the percentage or the flat rate would come in to show that broken down. Obviously, I can't comment on UK VAT legislation, but I appreciate that costs towards businesses in the tourism hospitality sector are particularly sensitive. However, I think for Scotland itself, there is a range of tourism products that appeals to both high-end and more budget-conscious visitors.
Okay, Councillor Illingworth next, please.
Great. Thank you, Provost, and thank you for all the reports. Given that potential expenditure is earmarked for caravan facilities, why should accommodation businesses fund infrastructure used by visitors who are not in fact paying the levy?
Thank you for your question. I think if you look at what's proposed in terms of how the visitor levy could be used, there are two elements to it. The first one is about the tourism sector itself, but there's also, helping communities which are impacted by tourism. So that's the element, obviously, which will support other infrastructures, maybe that people who are using this infrastructure but are not necessarily using an accommodation, in the area. But there's still a pressure on communities. So, and the communities are asking, for investment to manage that tourism impact. So that how is the levy will be used. But I take your point that people may benefit from this improved infrastructure, even if they are not using the accommodations.
Okay, happy. Councillor Mayor next, please.
Thank you, Provost. My question is quite a simple one, really, but it's back on the terms of the wording of the consultation. And I'm just wondering if there's going to be an opportunity for people to put a free text response into the consultation, or if everything is going to be multiple choice. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. We have been, as Serge mentioned earlier, we have been looking at the survey design for the next stage of the formal consultation. which will be rolled out over 12 weeks. We haven't quite got down to the detail of how that will look at the moment, but we will be consulting on all elements of the scheme that's been proposed. Okay. And yes, sorry, I possibly missed that bit. And yes, we can have a free text box in there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lane next.
Thanks. It's just for clarity. Councillor Duff mentioned about £6 million to the council, but it's to the council to reinvest in certain specifics. It's just for clarity for everybody. It's not going back in the council general revenue account to be used there. And I want to look at it the other way. We're talking, a lot of questions on the effect on the GVA from tourism of imposing or a levy. Has there been any work done on what the effect on GVA as if we do not reinvest or do not invest in our tourism-based offer, of how it will be affected as Perth becomes less and less attractive, as it becomes more run down and tired because we cannot invest? So would there be a negative GVA there? Tourism attraction, we've just talked about investing in libraries, which are an attraction, and we've had to find extra funding for that. We've got museums, we've got tourism, we've got leisure activities, which we're always having to find money for. So if, as has been proposed before, that we have to start closing these and other attraction, play parks, etc., what would the effect on the GVA be by not reinvesting, because the council will not be able to afford to do it?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Lane. We don't have a calculation of that impact, but what we've learned from the early engagement and from ongoing engagement with the visitor industry is the visitor industry itself is asking for investment, particularly destination marketing, branding, and there's little funding available to support that. Although the council has a small budget to support that, but it's obviously not enough to meet the needs of the industry. There's also obviously needs in terms of infrastructure. So we know that visitors, but also residents are using roads, they're using public facilities, they're using the outdoors. And we know there's a demand and a request for that, and that needs investment. But we have not calculated the fact that if we're not investing in this infrastructure, what will be the impact on the GVA, on our jobs?
So it would be fair to say that if we do not invest, it will have a negative effect on the GVA. Or could you argue again? Could you find a coherent argument against that statement?
What we know is there's definitively a requirement to invest in our infrastructure, because it's based on what people are telling us and what you're telling us as well as councillors, because in terms of the voice of the communities, people are asking for that investment, local investment.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson next.
Sorry, thank you very much. I was just wondering on bullet point 5.6, Serge, if you could explain further what community-led tourism initiatives might look like and how that might be invested in.
So as part of the proposal in the draft scheme, we've identified two areas where effectively the levy could be used if agreed by the council. One is obviously to support the visitor levy, the visitor tourism sector, and the other one is about the communities impacted by tourism. And that one, the question you ask is a bit in between. So you could have, in terms of the tourism sector, very specific community-led initiatives, which could be obviously led by the community and supported by the community, owned by the community, but they obviously need some support. So it could be specifically in terms of destination branding or marketing. It could be simply because they want to support a route in their community for walking or cycling. But it could also be, that's more in the impact of the tourism they may have. They may identify a hotspot in their area in terms of footfall, and they may want to improve the local facility, and that could be simply the toilets or the car park in that facility, but it could also be signage, and it could also, it's not only physical element, it could also be people. So it could be having support to people who are creating the vibrancy in the place as well. You know, like for instance, a small event or things that are similar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson next, please.
Yes, just a question on the report, page 55, paragraph 4.3. It states that whilst there was some support, this is regarding an earlier survey we carried out fairly recently in the trade, and isn't it true that the largest response was against the principle of a levy? Why is it not clear in the report that 832, 66% voted against the visitor levy, while only 428, 34% voted in favour of it? Look at the result in Dumfries and Galloway, who have now totally rejected it, which is a very similar tourist area to ourselves. I think we should follow the same principle of rejecting this. Thank you.
Not entirely sure there was a question, but I think the question was maybe why is it not?
So the consultation results of the early engagement are shared in the report. It's got quite a substantial amount of information, you know, there. What's important to note there is obviously the early engagement was not on a specific scheme. It was covering quite a wide, you know, spectrum of what could be available, because that was the obviously option, you know, from the Act. The difference with what is proposed in this report is a specific scheme with quite specific elements. So that will effectively will be able for people to really give their very specific views on these specific elements, more than maybe a general view on a wide spectrum of options. It's always difficult for people, you know, sometimes to engage in a wide spectrum of options. But I think it is well documented in the report, in terms of the appendix of the report, you know, what people have said it is early engagement.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cuthbert next, please.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, my question relates to if this goes ahead and we do the consultation, will we recalculate the elasticity of demand and the figures in terms of the impact on the GAV? In principle, I'm looking at the tourist industry at the moment, and there's a huge number of other pressures that are starting to come in. So, for example, non-domestic rates appear to have gone up by roughly 12.5%. You've had large national insurance contributions. The cost of borrowing is as high as it's ever been. The national minimum wage has gone up, living wage, and so on. So there's a huge number of pressures already on the tourism industry. And my concern is that as you move the price of the product up, you're getting closer and closer to the point where the elasticity of demand becomes much more sensitive. It's not 0.185, but it may be higher than that. So I'm just really trying to work out, will it be recalculated before the report comes back?
Yes, I think we'd be able to rerun the economic impact assessment to go along with the consultation process.
Can that be done then? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shires next, please.
Thank you. At 3.10, it says that if this report is approved today, I very much hope it isn't, a minimum 12-week consultation period would follow. It would seem very unfair if the timing of that was over the summer period and into the autumn when the sector will be extremely busy. So can we have a commitment to say that if it is approved, any consultation would not commence before the beginning of September or later on into the autumn period?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Shires. So we need to wait for the Act to be totally available. So the consultation will not start before end of July, which means the 12 weeks will cover August, September, and October. And I take your point, it's the sometimes busy time for the tourism industry. At the moment, we anticipate to come back to the council in December, but it will depend on obviously the level of engagement. It is also, it's not only an online survey, it is also working with, in terms of stakeholders across the board to find different channels to engage with them. So we make sure that we try to reach out to most stakeholders within that period in time. But we are aware of that, potential challenge.
Thank you for that. Just in response, I would very much ask that we, as the officers, would take that into consideration, because even if it's online, if you're running a business, your focus is on these. If Councillor Drysdale's out with his camera crew, he'll see that these businesses are up to their ears, and the last thing they want is to have to deal with yet more headspace to deal with consultations. So, will that come back to us for consideration about when these consultations would happen, so that we can take advice from the sector?
At the moment, obviously, this is what we are proposing, is effectively to run that, take that 12-week statutory consultation, but council can decide differently. That's our proposal at the moment.
Okay, Councillor Watt next, please.
Thank you, Provost. In the report, there's a large hotel in my ward was consulted, and they've got concerns about third-party and wholesale bookings through booking sites. It says the council advised the issue was being discussed at a national level, and the local authorities were awaiting formal guidance on whether the booking sites would collect a levy and pay the council levy, or whether it would have to be done at a separate transaction later. Have you had any clarity on that yet?
Hi there, thank you for the question. In terms of third parties, the levy is applied at the point of sale. So if an accommodation provider is selling on to a wholesaler, then the levy goes on at the point of sale and not at a later stage.
So the likes of Trivago or Bookings.com, there are other sites available. Will they be collecting the levy and sending it to the council then?
In terms of the online travel agents, they will take that. If it's to a consumer, they will take that payment. And I don't have to say, I don't know the specifics of how the OTAs will get that back to local authorities, but I would imagine that that will have to be through whatever platform we deploy, which is likely to be visitorlevy.scot. But that is quite different from selling on to a wholesaler, where you might be selling on 400, 600 bed nights, bedrooms.
So I didn't really get an answer to that there. Are the booking sites, because it's a big concern for some of the hoteliers locally in my area, that they are going to have to add the percentage onto the room fee to go onto the booking sites, and then just take the hit on that to pay the levy. Because if a Dutch firm is not going to collect the levy and send it to us, and that's how an awful lot of accommodation is booked in the sector, we'll have to get some real clarity on that before we go any further.
I can come back to you on the specifics following this meeting, but I do know that what has been agreed at national level is that if it's a sale by an individual accommodation provider to a wholesaler, whether they're overseas or in the UK, then it is added on at the point of sale. I will check that and come back.
I can perhaps provide some clarity, having operated in this environment. The OTA, in some cases, will collect money, but you are still liable to pay all the domestic taxes, and they will just remit to you the amount minus their commission amount. So you are still required to pay your own VAT, for example, and therefore I would imagine this will be different. You would still be required to declare it as part of your localised return in this case. That would be my understanding of how it would work. Councillor James next, please.
Thanks, Provost. I'm listening here, and yes, we've discussed this issue before, and we put it out to consultation before. So here we are. It seems a bit like the independence question, where if you ask the same question, we're expecting a different answer. What are we actually doing this for? What do we expect to achieve by asking this question again, please? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So the first consultation was an early engagement, which was non-statutory. So that's something we didn't actually have to do, but we decided to do to test the market. To go forward, we have to do a statutory minimum 12-week consultation. So this is why we have to go back out now with a design scheme as a discussion point to get the views of businesses, accommodation providers, residents, visitors, etc.
Okay, I think I have completed my first round of questions, and we're now on to second questions. So starting with Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Provost. Councillor Illingworth asked my original question, which was a bit of a shame because I'm sure my colleagues at the other end of the table would have loved for me to be talking about camper vans at the moment. But I'll move on to my one of my many other questions. And can I ask folk to look at page 72 of our document pack? And there's a phrase here which I find quite concerning. It's near the top. There had been understandable concern from conveners. Can I ask which conveners had concern? That concern resulted in the survey staying open longer to try and get more results. Those results were then deemed to not be appropriate and were removed from one version of this. So can I ask, who were the conveners that had concern, and was the concern enough for us to leave this survey open to try and get different answers?
Can you, sorry, we cannot find the reference to, is it page 72 in the pack? Is it part of the consultation reports? Yeah. Sorry, we tried to find it because we don't have the page number on it. I've got the page there, but
Perhaps I can offer a point of clarification, if I may, Provost. I was that convener when I was convener of economy and infrastructure. I was concerned to note that we hadn't, or we appeared not to have undertaken sufficient activity to actually gauge the views of visitors who obviously would be asked to pay any levy that was introduced. And so I encouraged officers to find further opportunity to do that engagement at events that were upcoming at that point in time.
I'm grateful to the leader of the council for that clarification. So this actually, I'm afraid, raises another question. So that intervention resulted in some more so-called visitors, which the report goes on to say, I get the gist, we don't actually think were visitors, which would be fine if it was an online question because we wouldn't know who was filling it in. The leader of the council has just said something about events. So were these surveys taken at events where you could look people in the eye and determine if they were visitors or if they were not visitors? So therefore, there would be no reason to be concerned about the sudden increase in so-called visitors.
If I may just offer further clarity, the answer is both. There was a desire to send people out into the field to speak to visitors face to face, in addition to the ongoing online consultation.
Okay, thank you. Bailey next, please.
Thank you, Provost. My second question, I just wanted to dive into the numbers a little bit in section 4.5 of the report. It says that based on 2024 visitation data, and there's a number in brackets there of 2.01 million nights, can we have a bit of detail on how that visitation data was arrived at? Because I don't think there's a super precise way of getting that, because I guess a hotel isn't required to publish details of how many visitor nights it has. What's the basis for that number, and are there any potential weaknesses in the assumptions under that? Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, are you still online? And if so, are you able to contribute to this, please?
Hello. Yeah, the figure of 2.01 million overnight visitor nights is based on a official statistic, the Great Britain Tourism Survey, that is co-funded by the National Tourist Boards of Britain, so Visit England, Visit Wales and Visit Scotland. This has been a long-running measure of domestic overnight tourism, and is recognised, as I said, as an official statistic, differing from a national statistics, which will be produced by the Office of National Statistics or government body. So that represents what would be determined the official and recognised measure of domestic overnight tourism. It is based on a sample of survey and then scaled up to represents the populations of the individual countries of Great Britain. So in terms of does it have any underlying weaknesses, it is based on the requirements of official statistics, so it follows standardized legislation in that area. But at the same time, it can be argued that whilst every effort is taken to get a representative number, it is based on a sample survey. However, it is consistent, and it is based on and recognised as an official statistic.
Great, thank you. That sounds robust. Thank you for the reassurance.
Thank you. Councillor Duff next.
Thanks very much, Provost. Just a comment about Councillor Lane's comment earlier about the need for investment in Perth and Kinross. I think we all identify the root cause of that is a lack of Scottish Government funding for local authorities, and wouldn't be solved by yet another tax on a key industry for Perth and Kinross. But my question is in relation to the issue around the VAT on the levy. As we know, there's been a lot of discussions around about the impacts of that for businesses. So what estimate do we have of the number of businesses which will be pushed over the VAT threshold if this proposal was implemented? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. At the moment, we don't actually have a data set for that. I am aware that has been asked a few times, and at the moment, yeah, we don't have a data set, unfortunately.
Okay, Councillor Illingworth next.
Thank you, Provost. When the Scott Street fire took place, the terrible Scott Street fire took place about a year ago, Salutation were able to help, and they did a lot of work as that night to help people out. And the reason they were able to do that was because they had capacity, they had empty hotel rooms. So my question is, has Perth and Kinross visitor levy modelling been based on actual guest paid occupancy and visitor behaviour, or on accommodation capacity and theoretical availability? Thank you.
Chris, are you able to comment on that, please?
Yes, so one of the initial phases of this study was to determine a potential forecast of income. This is why we used a base year of 2024. So we had the overall number of domestic overnight visitors, number of nights and expenditure. We derived forecasts based on a number of potential scenarios, initially based on the percentage rate, but subsequently with the fixed rate, across a number of percentages and values of fixed rate. Part of that was taking the number of visitor nights, but also looking at occupancy rates across multiple sectors. This again was based on figures that were available as industry standard measures of accommodation occupancy, so hotel occupancy, bed and breakfast occupancy, self-catering, caravan and camping, and so on. So it took into account not only the seasonal occupancy levels, because obviously there could be a seasonal element of higher occupancy during summer months compared to winter months, or potentially vice versa in more highland rural areas. So that was incorporated into the initial forecasting of potential income across a number of proposed levy structures that could be applied.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kigali next, please.
This one is for Serge, please. It is a little rhetorical and a little facetious, but you did earlier say that there's appetite from businesses for more investment. Whilst that may be true, I'd just like to explicitly ask, do they support this as a proposal? Because I do think that's something worth being super clear about.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Kigali. As part of the early engagement, obviously, the views were that a part of the industry was not in favour, obviously, of the levy. Having said that, immediately people were saying, well, if you introduce the levy, we would prefer, for instance, the fixed rate. And immediately after that, they will say, well, we hope and we ask for the money to be used towards the investment which was needed. So, I mean, the views are quite, people have to take into account the whole, element, of what's proposed, and there were obviously, balance in that way, in sense of the need for investment, the need that for the levy to be used for the things which was needed, and the fact that it was practical and simple. But you're right, there was part of the industry, which were not in favour.
Can I follow up and just to again be super clear? You're saying part. It's a significant part. It's a majority, and I just think we need to be really clear about that, because it does feel occasionally like the rhetoric here is getting muddied. And that's not that's not about you specifically, Serge. That's about the whole process. Is we're trying, I think, occasionally here to be overly diplomatic about something that does seem to have robust in the round opposition.
I think we're moving into comment here, so I think we can save that for comment later. Councillor Lisbeth with the first question.
Thank you, Provost. Just looking at the economic
impact assessment, it does specifically say that it doesn't take account of any of the exemptions. When it's being rerun, could some estimate of the impact of the exemptions that are set out in section 7 of the draft scheme please be incorporated? Thank you.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you. Councillor Braun next, please.
Thanks, Provost. Question there comes back to the accommodation providers themselves, and I note in the report 5.17, we're proposing a fee of 2.5% to be retained from the levy. I'm just wondering how we came to that figure, how we analysed that as being a fair figure. And also, obviously, there's a situation where the levy could push a business into a VAT situation. And should they be paid more for the extra paperwork that could be instigated here because of the VAT side? So the question is 2.5% actually a fair amount for the providers? Should it not be a little bit higher than that?
I think the rate itself has been selected as a kind of fair representation of what an administrative cost will be. But that's why I was meaning earlier on about the specifics in the scheme. So that specific question will be asked, to people responding to say, do you think 2.5% is a reasonable amount in terms of administrative costs for the business? And they will have an opportunity to comment, on that level.
Okay, thank you. Bailey Williamson next, please.
Thank you, Provost. I imagine this figure might be very, very difficult to quantify, but I was wondering if we have any costings for how much the tourism industry costs the public purse, both primarily and secondary costs, which may include tax breaks from the UK and the Scottish government to support the tourism industry. So how do we have any figures of what it actually costs the public purse or even the Perth and Kinross Council?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Williams. It's very difficult to answer that question in terms of effectively the tourism impact on the public purse, because it's so diversified, and I think they will need some specific research for that. I think there may be some research already carried out, but we could obviously look to see if there was anything available. What would be important, and is mentioned in the report, is that if the visitor levy was introduced, that obviously a monitoring and evaluation of will be undertaken, and as part of that is also the overall tourism impact on our communities. So that could be part of that monitoring and evaluation work that we could carry out if the council agrees.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Colin Stewart next.
Thanks, Provost. I just wanted to follow up a wee bit on the reply to Councillor Laing's first question about using about what the tourist tax monies might be used for. And Mr. Maroon, you were talking about or during the exchange for the questions, there was talk about roads and playgrounds. My understanding of the tourist tax was that it couldn't be used to support the ongoing activities of the council. So things like, for example, the museums and the libraries. If there's something extra happening in terms of tourist information in libraries, that could be supported. But we can't use the tourist tax to support ongoing activities of the council. And as a follow-up to that, I was interested in the wording in about, excuse me, what is allowed to be the priority, or what the priority areas for investment of revenues would be, including supporting the tourism and supporting communities and managing the impacts of tourism. I get all of the stuff about the visitor management, the countryside rangers, that all makes sense to me in terms of a use of the tourist tax. But in terms of things like roads and play parks, are we saying that somewhere, for example, your ward, Provost, Pitlochry, where there's a high visitor economy versus somewhere maybe like Bertha Park, where I suspect there's no visitor economy. So do the roads in Pitlochry then get paid, get upgraded and paid for by the tourist tax? And there has to be a segregated pot of money for paying for roads or play parks in Bertha Park?
So you're right that the visitor levy has to be used for tourism sector activities. That's why we are looking at the two areas. One is to support the tourism sector and one is supporting communities and managing impact of tourism. But in managing impacts of tourism, the example you gave, in Pitlochry, if say the car park there, because of the footfall, the number of cars, the number of buses and so on, there's definitely an impact of tourism on that community. So if there was obviously an improvement to that car park, I think it would be legitimate for the visitor levy potentially to contribute towards that. But in other areas, that may not be the case, as you mentioned, because the impact of tourism is not, evidence. So that's the important element about how this money could be used. And remember as well that we, as part of the Act, we need to set up a visitor levy forum, which will include obviously representatives from the tourism industry, the communities, and so on. Although they will have an advisory role, they will have in some way a role in terms of the money and the use of that money, and to make sure the money is really supporting initiatives which obviously can manage the impact of tourism.
Thanks. I think what I'm trying to get at is so taking the car park example, so the car park in Pitlochry, heavy traffic, so it can be supported by the tourist tax. Car park elsewhere is supported by the car park trading account. But for the stuff that you're spending in the heavily trafficked tourist areas, you're proposing, just to be clear, are you proposing to spend tourist tax money on what would otherwise be general revenue account monies and services and expenditure, or so that the same thing would be paid for differently in different places depending on the amount of tourist traffic?
It will depend on what's proposed in terms of, so you can take the example of the car park. If there's an improvement effectively to accommodate more buses, because the tourism buses has to stop somewhere, obviously that work could potentially be paid by the levy. So it will be on the case by case basis in terms of the impact. It will not be a blanket approach to the money be used for so it will have to relate to the tourism and impact of tourism.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes next.
Thanks, Provost. And maybe in order to speed things on a bit, I'll run two very linked, closely associated questions together, if I may. And to illustrate, can I give an example? My questions are about the VAT element and about the exemptions. Probably one for you, Serge, I would imagine. So let's just assume I go to Kinlochrannoch for a week's holiday. I'm a resident of Perth and Kinross, therefore I'm exempt. So I pay my visitor tax to the hotel at Kinlochrannoch. I then pay the VAT on top of that. They take I think it's 2.5% admin fee for administering it. But then I come back home and I come to the council and I claim my money back. Do I get back the entirety that I've given to the hotel, including the VAT? And if I don't, where does that VAT element go to? And specifically on the 2 or 2.5%, apologies, can't remember which one it is, admin fee, is the council, when we have to administrate the scheme, are we limited to the 2 or the 2.5% fee as well, or can we just take whatever we feel we need to from the pot?
So in terms of the first element of the question, there will be a small element still left to the customer in terms of the VAT, because the council will not reimburse the VAT on your visitor levy fee that you've paid. So that will be still a charge to the consumer, small element of that VAT. on the second element of the council administrating, the scheme, that is a legitimate cost for the council to incur when effectively we will have to manage the funding coming from the businesses and also the reimbursement to potential customers. So that will be recharged to the visitor levy as a cost to that. We have not fixed a percentage, for the council there, because that will not be only the administration of this transaction. It's about supporting the overall scheme, which will mean obviously the visitor levy forum, monitoring and evaluation, potential research on what we are, the impact of that, and so all the governance arrangements as well. So it's not as straightforward as the 2.5% that the admin fee will be.
So just to be clear then, the Kinloch Rannoch tellers I used in this example is absolutely fixed to that 2.5%, no negotiation. That's what you're getting, end of story. Whereas the council can effectively take what we think it's worth. We don't have to justify that to anybody. We can quite literally take what we think it's cost us to perform that function.
So remember, we have to justify that as well. So it's not like it's a free pot for the council to administer the levy. And as I said, the 2.5% will be part of the consultation. So there will be opportunity for consultees to say if it's enough or not enough to cover the administrating cost. But in your case, I don't know how many transactions that hotel will have. That may be obviously quite a small number of transactions. But that would be part of the consultation if the 2.5% is not deemed sufficient.
Thank you. Councillor Ling.
Thank you very much, Provost. It's quite liberating being an independent here, but I would like to pick up on Councillor James's comment about the independence referendum. Well, times change and people's opinions change. If they didn't change, there wouldn't be so many ex-Conservative ministerial members, now members of the Reform Party, and they've obviously changed their minds. So I think people are allowed to change their mind at some time. My question is related to that. If this goes through this stage and becomes adopted in the next stage, which I think should be left, there'll be a new council by then. It's like myself, this council's right well into its autumnal years and is making decisions for the next council. If in 3 years this became be an issue, we adopt it, we move forward, will the new council or any council in the future, it will not be a governmental decision to walk away from this. It will be a council decision. So that's just what I want to ask, if this isn't set in stone forever, as Councillor James alluded that the independence referendum was. This is something, again, like the independence referendum, should be revisited or could be revisited. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, that is correct. It will be reviewed annually, but can also be reviewed every 3 years. Changes can also be made during the term of the 3 years while it's in place, and there'll be a 6-month consultation if any major changes need to be changed. But yes, there will be an annual monitoring of the report, and we can of the scheme, and we can make changes at any point as well.
Thanks. And just to confirm, in the report, it does say that there'll be a monitoring of levy in, levy out, and where it's going in that as well. And that'll all be part of the report. And that report will obviously be public, so everybody can see where it's going. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you. And my question just follows on from Councillor Ling's comment, actually. And there's obviously been a number of comments where I feel and others feel that we're not giving weight to the concerns of the tourist industry in the report. And I would draw your attention to paragraph 523 on page 62 of the report, which talks about annual reporting and monitoring, and it talks about that levy in, levy out annual report that Councillor Lane just mentioned. And to look at the various points that are raised in there, under 523, about what would be included in that. But there's no assessment of the impact on the economy, jobs, or the accommodation businesses mentioned at all in our annual report monitoring of the levy. And then 524, we have resident and visitor satisfaction surveys, but there's no mention of any survey of the accommodation businesses and tourist industry that's involved in that. And I find that an omission, especially when we talk about in 525 it being supporting transparency and accountability and continuous improvement. So I would like a confirmation that if we do proceed with this, that the concerns of the tourist industry will be featured going forward, and things like the impact on the economy and jobs and business surveys will form part of our annual report and monitoring. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your question, Councillor Duff. Yes, I apologize if we've missed, in some of the wording there in the report that could be included, but remember as well, we have a duty to set up a visitor levy forum, and in that forum, the industry will be the prime kind of, stakeholders in that forum, and there will be ongoing consultation with them on the use of the levy. But there's no issue to include the impact of the levy in terms of economic impact and jobs, bearing in mind that there's a kind of an annual report and there's a kind of 3-year review. So the impact on the economy, on the jobs, you may not have the baseline all the time, but obviously that will be looked at on an ongoing basis.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ken Harvey next, please.
Thank you, Provost. Council, we're pleased to know make no attempts at humour in this question, unlike previously. I think follows on from Councillor Stewart's question regarding the forum. I think that's where the pinch point could possibly be as to decisions made on how we spend this money. And I appreciate the forum is consultative only, but who will be choosing who's on it and how will it be formatted? Will that be someone from the council ourselves, or will Democrat or we have an input to it, or how is that going to be formulated? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Harvey. So in the report, you've got an examples of the type of groupings that we will, it could be part of the forum, but that will be part of that consultation questions as well. We will ask specific questions about the fact that, in the forum, who do you think should be in the forum, and with examples as well. And this is where I think the industry representation should come in, because there are different bodies of in terms of the accommodation sectors, so that would have to be balanced representation. In the same way, because we are talking about impact of the tourism on communities, it is about what communities representation we will have that on the forum. The forum is an advisory role. The decision-making body is the council, so we don't envisage to have councillors on the forum. However, there's nothing preventing, potentially, on the ward member level or even at a committee level, to have exchanges between the committees and the forum about what is happening on the visitor levy. So that's effectively things we can obviously ask as well as part of the consultation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Illingworth next.
Great, thank you, Provost. A couple of weeks ago, I met a couple of very nice ladies on Tay Street, and they were on a coach tour. Okay. And they'd come up from Somerset and were staying in a hotel in a remote part of Perthshire. They were having a great time. They'd been to the museum, they'd had a cup of tea in the museum tea room. In the afternoon, they were going over to Branklyn Gardens. And all the way through this journey for them, they were creating benefit for Perth and Kinross. There were more footfall in the town centre, more footfall at Branklyn Gardens, more employment in the remote area of Perth. They were paying VAT. The hotel they were staying at pays national insurance. And the point I'm making here is why are we talking about the impact of tourism when it brings us so many benefits?
I think that was more of a comment than a question. If Mr. Maroon wishes to provide any further answer, he's welcome to, but otherwise I'm going to
Just to say, I agree that tourism is bringing benefits to the Perth and Kinross area, and it has to be managed as well.
Okay, thank you. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering if someone could clarify whether there is room within the existing legislation for future iterations of the council to vary the tourism levy to for maybe seasonal variations, or to try and manage tourism away from maybe hotspots into other areas of Perth and Kinross by maybe lowering it in one area and raising it in another area to try and create a better distribution of tourists across Perth and Kinross.
Thank you for your questions. Yeah, the legislation is offering flexibility in how the levy could be applied in relation to geography and type of accommodation and so on. But that will have to go through a process, which is also laid out in legislation about consultation if any change will have to be made.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Provost. I'm interested in why we've looked at other places, Edinburgh, Amsterdam, Iceland and New Zealand as comparators. I don't see any of them bearing any resemblance to Perth and Kinross. Would we not be better to look perhaps at Dumfries and Galloway or Shetland Isles Council?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Forbes. I think we were trying to find examples which are broad enough to give you information on the different type of environment that, you know, when the levies. So that's why having examples from abroad are you know, useful. It is very difficult to find examples in Scotland and the UK because the levy has not been implemented for very long or not at all. So it is very good to compare and to have the impact on that. But I suppose with time, you know, that's the type of things that we can do as part of the monitoring, evaluation and benchmarking to see what are the differences between, you know, an area applying the levy or an area not applying the levy or applying the levy in a different way.
Thank you very much. I am going to put that as questions. I'm slightly disappointed that Councillor Lee and Councillor Forbes didn't get me to the bottom of my page, but you did a best attempt there. I'm going to thank officers for their significant answers during that session, and I'm now going to invite the Leader of the Council to move the report.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Provost. Thank you, members. It's been an interesting set of questions, and thanks to officers for the way that they have professionally answered these points, and indeed the representative of the people who have undertaken some of the work on our behalf. I just wanted to, before I go on to what I'd prepared to say, just respond to some of the points that have been made while I have the microphone. Firstly, to Councillor Cuthbert, his point regarding a revised economic impact assessment is very well made, and I think it's important that there is an update at the end of the consultation process, if agreed. To Councillor Shires, I would say that whilst I appreciated her comments about my video crew following me, I'm trying to get used to that. The consultation period would continue until towards the end of October, and that's well into, shall we call it, rainy season. So I think a period of 12 weeks is ample. To Councillors Duff and Forbes and others who have raised issues around the impact of VAT on the proposed levy. Clearly, VAT is a matter for the UK government, and as has been said, the rollout of visitor levy in other areas of Scotland and now under the Labour government in England and Wales, that may well give rise to additional consideration on the VAT aspects that have been raised, and obviously that's something of a UK-wide issue, not bespoke to Perth and Kinross. And can I also make a point that has been referenced latterly in the debate, but just to emphasise it, that any any visitor levy income will be strictly ring-fenced and subject to scrutiny, audit and review. So having said that, I want to return to what I planned to say, which is that I'm pleased to move this report, which presents a draft visitor levy scheme for Perth and Kinross for statutory public consultation. Let me be absolutely clear at the outset, today we are not being asked to introduce a visitor levy. We are being asked to take the next responsible step to consult fully and transparently on a proposed scheme before any final decision is made as to whether to proceed. Tourism is not a marginal concern for Perth and Kinross. It is a core part of our economy and our identity. With around 2 million overnight stays each year, approximately 360 million in visitor spending and supporting around 7,000 jobs across our communities. So it is very important, obviously. That is income for local businesses, employment for our residents, and vitality for our city, towns and rural areas. But it also brings pressures on infrastructure, on services, on communities, and on the very environment that attracts visitors here in the first place. The Scottish Parliament, with full cross-party support right across the Holyrood Chamber, has now given councils the power to introduce a visitor levy if we choose to do so. And importantly, recent legislation gives us flexibility in how we design that levy. What officers are proposing here reflects what we have heard via early consultation and engagement from businesses concerned about complexity, from communities concerned about impact, and from the sector itself asking for clarity and transparency. The draft scheme presented today by officers is a fixed rate levy per unit per night, with £4 per night as the reference point for consultation, alongside alternatives of £3 and £5 to properly test views. This approach has been chosen because it offers simplicity for businesses, transparency for visitors, and a predictable income to reinvest. And that income could be significant, as we have heard, around £8 million per year at a £4 rate, subject to consultation and final design. However, if the consultation shows a clear preference for an alternative model, it would be the intention that these would be reflected in any final proposals. Every pound raised must, by law, be reinvested locally for the benefit of visitors and communities. And the report sets out clearly what that could mean in practice. Increased investment in tourism infrastructure and services, better support for local businesses and events, further and more widespread improvements to public spaces, public transport, and we've heard earlier today about the great success of Glenfarg Community Transport Group, to which I add my congratulations. Let's work towards more of that. And to visitor facilities across the vast geography of Perth and Kinross. And crucially, targeted support for communities managing visitor pressures. To that, I would add this administration's ambition for funding fresh capital investment in including possibly the option of new ice facilities to help Perth and Kinross
become a leading tourist destination should a financially viable operating model be deliverable working with partners. This is about ensuring that tourism is successful and sustainable. Colleagues, the draft scheme has been developed carefully and thoughtfully. It includes a proposed exemption for local residents staying in leisure accommodation within the area. Perth and Kinross residents already pay council tax. They live here and should not have to pay more. Exemptions for vulnerable groups, including those on certain benefits. Consideration of carers and those without a permanent home. And recognition of the practical realities faced by businesses. This is not a blunt instrument, it is a balanced framework for discussion and consultation. We are also guided by the independent analysis of the renowned Moffat Centre at Glasgow Caledonian University, and thanks for the questions answered by the university today. The economic assessment suggests a visitor levy may have a modest initial impact on demand, but has the potential to generate significant reinvestment value, and that well-designed schemes do not deter visitors, especially when revenues are used well. That is the key point. Is that mine? No. No. That is the key point. The value comes not just from the levy, but from how we invest it. This is why the report is focused on consultation. A minimum 12-week statutory consultation will allow businesses, residents, visitors and communities to help shape the final scheme. And following that, this council be invited to consider the consultation results, an updated economic impact assessment, a refined proposal and a recommendation on whether to proceed at all. Colleagues, this is about getting the right approach for Perth and Kinross. Our priority will always be to provide quality services to the people who live here, part funded by council tax and rates alongside Scottish Government grants, but we also want to be able to invest more in our tourism sector without further increasing the burden on council taxpayers. It is about supporting a thriving visitor economy, further protecting and enhancing our places and communities, and making sure that the benefits of tourism are shared and sustained. Approving this report does not commit us to a levy at this stage, but it does commit us, as we must do, as we should do, to listening, engaging and making an informed decision. That is the right approach. I move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. The Leader of the Council has used almost all of the 10 minutes, Councillor Lang, so you have about 1 minute.
I will be very brief then. Thanks very much for the report and everything that came in. The only bit I take is it's not just the administration's ambitions to move forward the whole of Perth and Kinross. I was really grateful that the Leader of the Council accepted my proposition to put 200,000 in to provide him with lots of photo opportunities around about Perth in the budget, so that was welcome. I'd also like to thank him for putting the £15 million in the roads, which was my suggestion, and it was unfortunate he didn't take on the Conservative group and my suggestion to fund the Visitor Rangers at the time of the budget, but he learned that mistake quickly and brought it back in 7 weeks. So I think it's across the chamber we're all trying to drive this forward. I think that this is a chance to drive even further forward Perth and Kinross. We don't want it to lag behind. We want new events. We want everything brought forward. This is a great chance to do it. I think so. Also, we shouldn't be hamstringing, if that's a word, or making you can't hamstrung in the future, can you? So I'm trying to talk about future hamstrung. So hamstringing the next council coming forward with not giving them opportunities that they can revoke if they wish, if they feel it's not going to be successful. It is a really bad policy not to go forward. I don't see how MD can go against having consultation. And consultation on a framework is a totally different from the initial framework coming forward. People can see what's going to come out of this and all. So I'll definitely be obviously supporting it, and a thanks for being allowed to second this, and thanks, maybe Councillor Drysdale will speak quicker the next time that I'm going to second something. So thanks everybody, and I hope you all support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lane, for your long list of achievements there. If we can now move on to Councillor Duff to an amendment, please.
Thank you, Provost. I'll just give members a moment or two to.
Sorry, Councillor Duff, can you just switch your microphone off for a second?
Sorry.
Can committee circulate this by email as well, please? Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Provost. Firstly, in putting forward this amendment today, I think we need to remind ourselves that there has been a clear rejection of the principle of a visitor levy in our consultation processes so far, with 66% of the 1,600 combined responses being firmly against its introduction. It was decisively rejected by a significant majority of Perth and Kinross residents and businesses, and by a significant majority of visitors to Perth and Kinross who took part in the survey. And yet, you would have to dig down deep into the 200 pages of this report to discover that fact. Nowhere is it mentioned in the covering report, but for the record, 832 people opposed the introduction of a visitor levy and only 429 people supported it. Secondly, the draft scheme being put forward by the SNP today ignores other key messages which came out in the consultation. For instance, the majority of responses stated that there should be a cap on the number of nights when a levy would be applied, most nominating 5 nights or less. And yet, here we have a proposal that the £4 per night visitor levy should be applied for every night of a stay in Perth and Kinross, whether it's 1 night or 101 nights. Thirdly, the report tries to play down the stated negative impacts highlighted by the consultants, the Moffat Centre. In the economic analysis, we read that a £3 per night levy would raise £5.85 million for the levy fund, with only a quote, comparatively modest, unquote, impact of 2% off the gross value added figure for Perth and Kinross. Comparatively modest, a term I note also used by the leader in his speaking to his motion earlier. Now, at a gross value added total of £327 million, that means a drop of over £6.5 million in the visitor economy and potentially 140 job losses. It gets worse when we compare the £4 per night figure being proposed by the SNP in this proposal. It could raise £8 million of income with an estimated reduction in gross value added of 2.5% to 4%. This could potentially mean that the benefit of £8 million would be paid for by a reduction of over £13 million to the visitor economy and the loss of 280 jobs as a result. Surely we cannot look upon that as a good deal for Perth and Kinross, not by any stretch of the imagination. Heaven help us if the results of the smaller face-to-face survey were accurate. In that survey, 11% of visitors said that a visitor levy would put them off visiting or would cause them to change their plans. When you add in the issues for businesses around the VAT on the levy potentially pushing some businesses over the VAT threshold and requiring them to become VAT registered, you can understand the genuine concerns of businesses, residents and visitors surrounding the introduction of a visitor levy scheme. The evidence is there that while a visitor levy would raise a pot of money for the Council's visitor levy fund, it will be done at the expense of visitor demand, employment, business turnover, high street footfall, and will make Perth and Kinross a significantly more expensive place to visit. You will also note that the examples of existing places where a visitor levy has been introduced are not comparable with Perth and Kinross, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, all city authorities, not a rural authority as we have here. Iceland and New Zealand are whole country models. Rural authorities across Scotland are being far more cautious, with many, such as Argyll and Bute, Shetland and South Ayrshire, having paused or stepped back from its introduction, and Dumfries and Galloway outrightly rejecting its introduction just last week. Members, we should call a halt to this matter in Perth and Kinross right here and right now by rejecting these proposals before us today. Instead, we should be welcoming the UK government's reduction in the VAT rate across the country this summer, a drop to 5% for a wide range of tourism and family-related activities, which will have a positive impact on the cost of living for families and tourism. Indeed, we should be pushing for a more permanent reduction in VAT on the basis that it would be one way of stimulating growth in a visitor economy and on the high streets. And I hope that members across the chamber will support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Forbes, you have just over 5 minutes to second.
I'll try and speak as quickly as Councillor Ling. I'm sorry you cut questions short, actually, because my next question was about ring fence money, but I'll try and work that in this afternoon. So what we have in front of us, Provost, is a tantalising range of things we can spend this money on, further enhanced by a dangle of a carrot about ice at the next version of PH2O. There are also things we don't know. We don't seem sure about how the actual collection will happen with booking agencies. We don't know how many businesses will be pushed into the VAT threshold. A perfectly reasonable request by Councillor Shires to delay the consultation past summer, past the busiest time for tourist industries, has been rejected. However, we extended the consultation for a further month to get more visitor comments. We then decided they weren't real visitors, so that was excluded from the main analysis. Looking back to the last time we discussed this, 66% were against the proposal, yet that detail is hard to find in the documents we're looking at today. And as was exposed by Councillor Illingworth, we could face a ridiculous situation where caravan sites will add an extra £4 per night to their fees. That money will then be used to enhance facilities, which will make it easier for camper vans to park in laybys and therefore not actually use these very same campsites which have collected the money to give to the council. This debate has exposed huge flaws in the process, but worse than that, as was made clear by Councillor Duff, the data is very hard to find. But in amongst the papers, we are told that this will cost more money than it generates. We're seeing this as a cash cow to fill a gap left by the Scottish Government underfunding. And if other political parties want to give the Scottish Government a free pass, I think that's a football reference, so I'm not really sure, then that's their choice. But in my view, we should be using this as a way to expose them for the chronic underfunding that all local councils across Scotland have suffered. There's not in any world where I can see this making sense. And therefore, we should have the courage to follow Dumfries and Galloway, Shetland Isles Council and others who've knocked this crazy idea on the head. So in conclusion, Provost, we should, as an authority, be grateful to the work our tour sector do to stimulate the economy of Perth and Kinross, and we should stop beating them into submission.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forbes. You did very well there, nearly the same amount of time as Councillor Ling, so that was very impressive. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you very much, Provost. Perth and Kinross Council, with a population of approximately 240,000, welcomes 2.4 million visitors per annum, with the majority arriving by car. Indeed, Edinburgh and Inverness airports hire out the second and fourth highest number of vehicles per annum. Within my ward, the Enchanted Forest attracts 84,000 visitors to Pitlochry in 1 month, yet the town has just over 600 public parking spaces. Wild camping and particularly its excesses has led to people calling for a review of the hard-fought right of access legislation, and making these points to demonstrate some of the impacts that tourism is having and the pressures it's creating on the area. There is no doubt in my mind that high-density tourism is not only creating pressures on the host population and its infrastructure, but also the local authority, while public finances are contracting. My view is we need to support the tourism industry to enable its continual growth within a very competitive market, and invest within the host communities in order to create highly qualified people to support the industry into the future. I will be supporting this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey Williamson. Bailey next, please.
Thank you. I think with all that extra council tax from the 100k headcount. Oh, sorry, am I live? Thank you. I think with all the council tax from that 100k headcount, we don't need to worry about the visitor levy. But regarding the paper, we have to be very careful when we sit here in the chamber today setting a tax rate on people who don't have it within their gift to kick us out of office if they don't like it. I'm in support of the principle of a visitor levy, but can't support spending the time, money and effort to start formal consultation here because I can't tell what the problem is that we want to solve and it's too blunt a tool. I'm conscious that tax is usually used either to disincentivise something or to raise revenues for a pressing common good need. I'd assume the goal here today isn't to disincentivise tourism, so therefore it's the cash grab type of tax. Therefore we have to look at why we need to do a cash grab. All roads on that lead to government. So the problem we're solving for here is insufficient funding of local government in the whole. Those voting for this obviously don't want to disincentivise tourism to Perth and Kinross, but they are holding their noses and voting it through anyway. Their hands are tied. What they're admitting is that actually they have to vote this through because there's no other way to keep the lights on. The other issues with this specific proposal to my mind are the regressive nature of it. An engineer who comes to my ward to help fix a heat pump and needs to stay a night pays the exact same rate as a person who is coming, a couple who are coming for a golfing retreat at Glen Eagles. And that's just not fair. Hoteliers already bear a great burden of taxation. There's VAT, rates, national insurance, corporation tax, beer duty, to name but a few. One hotelier in my ward came to me a couple of years ago and joked that he may as well change his LinkedIn profile to say his occupation is a tax collector, not a hotelier. Furthermore, it's a tax that then is subject to tax and leads to the complications that we've heard earlier. No consideration is also given to border effects. For example, the housing market areas recognise that a large part of my ward is effectively in the Dundee housing market area. Two of the hotels in my ward are also arguably in the Dundee hotel market area, if we were to look at things that way, and therefore have to compete with Dundee hotels, and there's no recognition of that in the proposal we have today. The current proposal is a blunt tool, but a tool that tries to solve a very real problem. I'm therefore going against the proposal today, but if what comes back addresses the concerns I've stated, then that position can of course change. You'll be pleased to hear that to help us get home before 5 today, I'll vote for the amendment, even though I don't like the tone of part 1 that mentions this should be a death knell forever, but I'll save you all from the pause while I draft an amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bailey. Bailey McLaren next, please.
Thank you, Provost. I'll be brief. The Liberal Democrat group fully recognise the value of local visitor economy. And additionally, we are also fully cited on continuing pressures many businesses are navigating. However, it is vital the multiple views are captured. Visitor levy is an emotive proposal. Prior to this chamber voting on a potential proposal to enact a visitor levy, it is prudent a further consultation is offered to our residents and businesses. We cannot decide without these views on the detail of a draft scheme. As a Liberal Democrat group leader, I wish to make it clear to all in the chamber, residents, businesses, sector bodies, communities and media, we are supporting a consultation on a draft scheme only, as is the ask of the paper, and should not be translated as a vote for a visitor levy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McLaren. Councillor Donaldson next.
Thank you, Provost. I support this paper. I think important aspect is, and repeat again, the Council is not being asked at this stage to implement a visitor levy, but rather to approve a draft scheme for the purposes of statutory public consultation. Yet what we're getting from the Conservative group is no, no, no. We've had almost everything thrown at it by the Conservatives. Councillor Shires is saying it's not the right time for consultation. In fact, the consultation, from what we've heard here, will last until probably about the end of October. Councillor James asking, what are we doing this for? Well, if you look at the paper and the potential and I've always supported a visitor levy, it's considerable. I know Councillor Duff will argue that this is all things that should be funded by the Scottish Government. But if you look seriously at pages 59 and 60 of the paper, it sets out a whole range, and obviously I'm not going to go through all the aspects of possibilities. I think the other thing to make clear is a visitor levy is not something unique to Scotland. It applies throughout very large parts of Europe, and it passes really at times without much comment. And it does mean that tourists and visitors can make a small contribution to the cost of the area and the running costs of an area that they're staying in. I see nothing wrong with that. So the other thing is to make clear is on the consultation, we will listen to a whole range of possibilities. For instance, Councillor Robertson talked about affordable tourism, and I think that is something, yes, we may want to consider. What I would say, though, is Bailey Williamson's raised the question of variable rates. But I think the one thing we want to make clear is that the system, if we go ahead today in the final recommendations, is a system that has the least administrative burden, but it's the benefits that you can see. And pages 59 and 60 set out some of them. And I really want to ask the Conservatives just how a lot of those projects they would fund without a visitor levy. And being realistic here, I think the thing about a visitor levy is it does produce local revenues for funding local tourism needs and tourism economy needs. And that can also be of very considerable benefit to people not involved in the tourism economy, but who are residents of Perth and Kinross. We should proceed, and then we will wait until November, December, and then we make the final decision. I think it's unfortunate the Conservatives today are just saying, no, we just can't do it. I think it's short-sighted. I think it's a great shame. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey next.
Thank you, Provost. Unfortunately, Councillor Donaldson's stolen all of my quotes and said them a lot more eloquently than I can probably ever say them. I do get the impression that some of the opposition here is somewhat disingenuous. We've been through this process for quite a while, and it's gone through all the steps you would normally help. And I don't think some of the quotes here today that are obviously press ready are really appropriate for what we're trying to discuss. I'm obviously behind this scheme, but mainly similar to Councillor Donaldson, is we as Perth and Kinross taxpayers have to support the visitors who come here. And I think this is a good way of raising a small amount of money for them for specific projects in tourist areas. We don't want to turn into a place like Cornwall where there's like no one living anymore, and we need to give opportunities to people living here. So therefore, I'll be supporting this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Peter Barrett next.
Thanks, Provost. I think it's important to recognise what Bailey McLaren says, that we're approving a consultation, not the actual levy today. You might actually think from the flurry of emails that we've received this week that the council had already decided to launch its consultation on the visitor levy. But I think what that demonstrates is it certainly shows that there will be keen interest amongst the community and in the tourism and visitor sector, and that we will get a substantial response to the consultation. And I think it is important that we gather all responses and consider them carefully. The acute financial crisis that we face, or crises that we face, are well rehearsed and well documented within this chamber, if not acted upon across the whole of it. We know that we have increasing demands for statutory services, increasing costs, increasing complexity and cost of needs to address those, and that requires an ever increasing proportion of our budget, both human resources and financial. Provost, I'd be very grateful if officers could clarify the point that John Duff made, because my understanding of the Visitor Levy Scotland Act 2024 is that the number of nights that apply is capped at 5 and not the 101 that he mentioned. So if we can get some clarification of that, then I think that would be really helpful, and perhaps Councillor Duff can consider that statement that he'd made when it comes to summing up, because I'm sure he didn't mean to mislead the chamber. Provost, I don't really have any sympathy with Councillor Forbes' argument, which tries to make a virtue of doing nothing other than blaming the Scottish Government. I kind of agree with them on the latter with regards to fair funding for local government. But, you know, I think we have to deal in the world in which we exist. I have much more sympathy for Bailey's analysis. And let's not forget, with regard to setting a fixed rate per evening, that it was the sector that wanted that, as opposed to a percentage basis for reasons of simplicity, comprehensibility, and ease of administration. So, as I've said, we can't rely on the Scottish Government to provide fair or adequate funding for essential services. We know that there are limits to the extent that council tax rises can, or probably more accurately can't, rise to meet the full scale of need and rising service needs. So any new revenue raising powers that are available to us need to be carefully considered and shouldn't be dismissed without that full consideration. And therefore, I think it is incumbent upon us to explore a visitor levy scheme further, because it can provide vital ring-fenced monies to support our visitor economy. And I recommend that we carry out the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm advised that there is no cap, so Councillor Duff is correct.
Thank you for that, Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Shires next.
Thank you, Provost. I made a flippant comment about Councillor Drysdale and his film crew, but you really do need to get out and speak with representatives of the self-catering businesses across Perth and Kinross. You'll find a sector which is already up to its ears in red tape and bureaucracy, a sector doing their best to provide fantastic accommodation and experiences are just being penalised at every turn. Businesses that I've spoken to are already operating on tiny margins and yet continuing to invest in their businesses so that they can keep themselves at the top of the game. And they need to do that in order to compete within the Scottish market. With regards to the timing of any consultation, Councillor Drysdale and Councillor Donaldson, you're just wrong about October being well into rainy season, apart from the fact that all year can be rainy season in Scotland. You maybe want to speak to businesses in Pitlochry, Dunkeld, Blairgowrie, Strathardo, Glenshee, and I dare say over in Crieff as well, during the Enchanted Forest season and the October school holidays, when occupancy is high and everywhere is busy. This just reinforces my opinion that councillors making these decisions are out of touch. It is embarrassing to me that SNP councillors and now we hear Lib Dem councillors in this chamber just don't seem to care that we're adding this burden of a consultation to businesses who are either very busy or struggling just to keep the show on the road. Dumfries and Galloway Council understood this. They understood the risks that this proposed levy would put on their businesses and they rejected it. We should follow their lead. And while we do that, we should just stop this proposal now and instead put all of our collective efforts into ensuring that the Scottish Government finally provide a fair deal to councils so we can just get on and fund our own services. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Councillor Ian Massey next, please.
Thank you, Provost. I want to express my support for this consultation. As has been said many times by many people, we are not being asked to introduce a levy today. We've been asked to start a conversation with residents, businesses and the tourist sector. I think that's a reasonable step to take. Everyone is aware of the economic benefits that tourism brings to our area, but also brings pressures on our infrastructure, on our services, and on our communities. We must ask ourselves how we maintain the success of our tourism sector and manage the impact. And this is where the idea of the visitor levy comes in. It is not as if it's a radical idea, it's happening elsewhere. And what those places have shown, if done properly, kept simple, transparent, and the money is reinvested locally, it can actually improve the visitor experience and support communities in the long term. If we vote this down today, we're not solving the issue, we're just stopping the conversation before it even begins. And I'd hope that all members of this chamber agree with me that we should not stop debate and will agree to proceed with the statutory public consultation and let the public voice, the very people we represent, be heard. As I've already said, this isn't a vote for a levy, it's a vote to listen, to test the idea and to make an informed decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Massey. Councillor Colin Stewart next, please.
Thank you, Provost. Back in 2019, I seconded a motion on proposing that the council, and it was accepted, write to the Chancellor of the Exchequer to alleviate the burden of VAT on hospitality businesses in Perth and Kinross, but across the UK, recognising the importance of the sector to the economy of Perth and Kinross. So I'm grateful to Councillor Duff and Forbes for incorporating the second and third points there in their motion. And I think the Leader of the Council has indicated that he's also happy to incorporate. So grateful for that. Provost, there was a question asked earlier about some aspect of how hotels pay their taxes. You were able to step in and provide the answer, being a former hotelier yourself, which was helpful. But I see why you're a former hotelier. We've heard about from a couple of different councillors about the number of different ways. I think Bailey put it that a hotelier is a tax collector. So non-domestic rates, employer national insurance contributions, fuel and energy costs, which as we know are rising, waste disposal costs, which have to be paid, VAT, corporation tax, alcohol duty. I'm sure I must be missing some. Oh, paying for license, paying for premises licensing as well to the council. I can't think of a sector of the economy. There will be more regulated sectors of the economy. I can't think of a sector of the economy where there would be more individual taxes and duties and licenses required off the top of my head. So I think it's incumbent on us to try and reverse this trend. Instead of putting a new tax on a struggling sector, let's try and reduce the tax burden that they already face. The report says, and I say this to the SNP group and to the Liberal Democrats, the report says that the tourist sector, the hospitality businesses in Perth and Kinross will reduce and that jobs will be lost as a result of implementing a tourist tax. Why are we trying to pretend that we're supporting the sector and we're supporting businesses in Perth and Kinross when the report in front of us says that the opposite will happen? Provost, I'm very happy to support the amendment and commend it to the chamber.
Thank you, Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Provost. I'm not quite sure where to start, to be honest. I kind of despair about a number of things that have been said here this afternoon. I think that one point I will make is that a number of contributors this afternoon seem to forget that Perth City is in fact a tourist destination as well, and therefore any suggestions that perhaps they shouldn't benefit from any schemes as a result of this tourism levy should not happen. I also want to remind everyone that any benefits for visitors will also benefit hugely our communities in terms of improved infrastructure, if that's what's required, improved parking, improved roadways, etc., etc. The whole public space will improve as a result of the contributions that will be made here. I think the other thing I would probably like to point out is that doing nothing is dead easy. You know, that to me, that's a coward's way out, to be honest. But we have, you know, and I think this paper is purely about going out to a statutory consultation process. Change is never easy, but as I think somebody said here already, if we don't change, nothing would ever happen. We'd stay still forever. And my final point, Provost, is that I think we need to perhaps consider doing some sort of elected members briefing on the difference between a tax and a levy. They're entirely different things. And I think it's incorrect and I think it's misleading, not just within this chamber, but to the public at large about what this proposal is about. They're two entirely different things, both in law and in statute and everything else. So I think that being accurate in our representations here in this chamber is incumbent upon all of us. And I would suggest that this type of inaccuracy is not allowed to continue. And finally, I will wholeheartedly support this paper. I think it's the right thing to do to go out to consultation again. And I sincerely hope that the consultation results will be within the context of the whole of the population of Perth and Kinross, and that we have a full rounded opinion from everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McCall. Councillor Liz Barrett.
Thank you, Provost. Given the substantial benefits that a visitor levy can potentially bring to Perth and Kinross, I support proceeding with consultation on the draft scheme. We know that we're going to face severe budget challenges in the coming years, with no commitments from the Scottish Government about fair future funding for our councils. We want to be able to do more to promote our fantastic region and its many businesses who support and benefit from visitors. We want to be able to invest to provide more and better services like public toilets, tourist information signs, our visitor ranger teams, transport options, active travel and cycling support, green tourism and affordable accommodation for staff. But we know we don't have the resources to provide all these and we can't do it through council tax. I also welcome the commitment from officers to provide an updated and extended economic impact assessment on the proposals. And I would urge all those who've sent representations to councillors already to provide these as responses to the statutory consultation, and also for everyone else to give their views so that concerns and comments from all sides can be considered and adjustments to the scheme developed where appropriate. Please do support the recommendations of the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. I have no further comments and therefore I'm going to go to the Councillor Duff as the mover of the amendment to sum up first.
Thank you, Provost. I think I've made it clear in my speech that there is significant opposition to the introduction of a visitor levy in Perth and Kinross, and this has been borne out by the results of the initial survey, with 2/3 of residents, businesses and visitors firmly against the introduction of such a scheme. Councillor Donaldson raised the issue of tourist tax in Europe and elsewhere. That may be the case, but the rates of VAT in Europe are generally between 6 and 10%, and only Denmark is higher than the UK's 20% VAT. It's clear that implementing a visitor levy will have an impact on the visitor economy in terms of income and jobs, and the impact will not only be the modest kind as described in the report. Councillor Massey stated that we're being asked to start a conversation. That conversation was started a long time ago. We have heard from the key stakeholders across the industry, but it is plain that some of us are turning a deaf ear to their concerns and minimising the significant risks to their businesses and the wider tourism, hospitality and retail businesses who will all be impacted by this proposal if it is implemented. Finally, can I thank the officers for confirming that there is no cap on the number of nights, as I stated earlier. I commend the amendment to the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, just two or three things. Councillor Stewart's analysis appears to focus entirely on what he sees as the negatives of visitor levy, and seems to me to completely disregard all the potential upsides for everyone we serve, including improvements to the public realm, to better services, to visitor rangers, which memory tells me the Conservatives were quite keen on, and also could give us the scope for potential capital investment in new facilities to attract more tourists. All these positives need to be taken into account. As regards the issue about a prescribed cap on the number of nights, Councillor Duff didn't read out the entire advice that was given by the monitoring officer in the chat. For clarity, there is no prescribed cap on the number of nights, but local authorities may themselves introduce a cap. If that is the intention, this must also be consulted on, and that there will be a question regarding this within the consultation. In other words, if there is a majority or a strong opinion in that regard, then that is something that can be introduced. The initial consultation was not on this proposed draft scheme, it was on the principle of the scheme, and that is an important distinction. We're talking about new laws having been passed and a bespoke proposal coming forward from officers, which is absolutely going to be capable of being tweaked in accordance with the wills expressed in the consultation. So, without any further comment from me, I would urge the Chamber here and members of the public who may be listening to this debate to reflect on everything that has been said today and see the benefits or the potential benefits a visitor levy would bring to everyone that we serve in Perth and Kinross. I move, and I'm very happy for the avoidance of doubt to incorporate items 2 and 3 from Councillor Duff's proposed amendment into the motion.
Councillor Ling, are you also happy for that incorporated?
Oh, very happy.
Thank you very much. Right, we shall move to the vote.
Thank you, Provost. Members, we're dealing with item 6 on the agenda, the report by the Strategic Lead Economy Development and Planning. We have a motion by Councillor Drysdale, seconded by Councillor Lane, to agree the recommendations within the report. We have an amendment by Councillor Duff, seconded by Councillor Forbes, the terms of which were circulated to you. The motion has since been updated to include points 2 and 3 of the amendment. So can I now ask members
get some clarity. Councillor McEwen, you wish to discuss a point of order in the lunch break, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. You may continue, Mr. Hendry.
Thanks, Provost. So yes, members can indicate if they're voting for the motion or the amendment.
Amendment.
Councillor Allen.
Amendment.
Councillor Anderson.
Amendment.
Amendment.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Motion.
Councillor Peter Barrett.
Sorry, just before voting, can I thank officers for their clarification with regard to the cap on the number of nights and acknowledge that I got wrong and offer apology to Councillor Duff for that. And I would vote for the motion. Thank you.
Councillor.
Amendment.
Bailey Brock.
Amendment.
Councillor Carr.
Motion.
Councillor Chan.
Amendment.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Amendment.
Councillor Donaldson.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Thanks to Councillor Barrett for the apology and amendment.
Amendment.
Councillor Frampton,
Motion.
Councillor Freshwater,
Amendment.
Councillor Harvey,
Motion.
Councillor Illingworth,
Amendment.
Councillor James,
Amendment.
Councillor Clogali,
Amendment.
Councillor Lang,
Motion.
Councillor McPherson,
Motion.
Councillor Mayer,
Motion.
Councillor Massey,
Motion.
Councillor McCall,
Motion.
Amendment.
Councillor McEwen,
Motion.
Bailey McLaren,
Motion.
Deputy Provost,
Motion.
Councillor Rebeck,
Motion.
Councillor Robertson,
Motion.
Councillor Shires,
Amendment.
Councillor Smith,
Amendment.
Councillor Colin Stewart,
Amendment.
Councillor Grant Stewart,
Motion.
Councillor Watt,
Motion.
Councillor Waters,
Motion.
Councillor Welsh,
Motion.
and Bailey Williamson.
Motion.
Provost, we have 22 votes for the motion, 18 votes for the amendment, so the motion is carried.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hendry. We will now break for lunch and return at 2:45, members. 2:45.